The room is dark, and yet it is not. There is a faint green light here, the kind that does not come from any lamp or window. It rises instead from the long wooden tables, from the small dishes set out in rows, from the bristles of 100 fine brushes laid neatly in their grooves. It is a soft light, a low and patient light, the colour of new leaves seen under water. It does not flicker, it does not warm the air, it simply waits, the way a thing waits when it has nowhere it needs to be. You stand in the doorway for a moment before you go in. The floorboards are cool beneath your shoes, and the morning has not yet arrived in full. Outside, the town of Orange is only beginning to stir. A milk wagon somewhere, a dog answering another dog 2 streets over, the low cough of a factory whistle clearing its throat for the day. But in here it is still, and it is green, and it is yours for these few quiet minutes before the others come. The air smells faintly of paste and turpentine, of clean paper and something else underneath, something mineral and dry, like the inside of a stone that has never seen rain. You have grown used to it. You barely notice it now. It is simply the smell of work, of money, of the small bright future you're stitching together one watch face at a time. On the table nearest you the dishes glow a little brighter where the powder has settled thick. You lean close without meaning to. The light touches your face. It catches in the small hairs of your arm and lays a faint shine along your knuckles, and for a moment you're something more than a girl in a cold room before dawn. For a moment you are lit from within, like a lantern, like a saint in an old painting, like something the dark cannot quite hold on to. You do not yet know what the light is. Almost no one does, in this year, in this town. You know only that it is beautiful, and that men in good suits have told you it is harmless, and that it pays better than the laundry or the shirt factory ever could. You know that the soldiers far away will carry the watches you paint, and that in the trenches at night they will read the hour by the work of your steady hand. So you set down your bag, you pull out your stool, you take up the first brush of the day and you turn it slowly between your fingers, watching the way the green clings to the bristles like dew. The whole room holds its breath with you, and somewhere far ahead of this morning, far past the edge of anything you can see, the light is already keeping count. Let yourself settle now. Wherever you are, let your shoulders come down from where they have been holding all day. There is nowhere you need to be for the next little while, nothing you need to solve, no hour you need to keep. The story will carry you. All you have to do is listen and breathe and let the year fold quietly back to a time long before you were born. It is the spring of 1917. The world is at war, though the war is an ocean away, a rumour carried in newspapers and in the worried faces of men at the streetcar stop. America has only just entered it. In the cities along the eastern edge of the country, the factories are humming, and the work is plentiful, and for a young woman with quick hands and good eyes, there has never been a moment quite like this one. You live in Orange, New Jersey, or near enough to walk to it. It is a town of brick and brownstone, of church steeples and trolley wires, of small houses set close together with washing strung between them like flags. Your family came here from somewhere else, as most families did, from Italy or Ireland or the worn-out farms of the old country, carrying little more than the names of the saints and a willingness to work until the work was done. You are young. Perhaps you're 17, perhaps a little more. You wear your hair pinned up the way the older girls do, and you own one good dress and one ordinary one, and you have learned already that the world does not hand things to girls like you. Things must be earned, and earned again, and held tightly once they're got. This is simply the shape of the world as you have found it, and you do not waste much time wishing it otherwise. But there is a new kind of work in town, and it is not like the laundry, where the steam swelled your hands and the lye cracked them open. It is not like the shirt factory, where the foreman watched the clock as if every minute belonged to him. This new work is clean. This new work is delicate. This new work pays by the piece, and a fast girl can earn more in a day than her father brings home, and the men who run it call you an artist and mean it or seem to. The work is painting watch dials. Not just any paint, but a paint that glows in the dark, a glowing paint that is the marvel of the age. You have seen the advertisements. You have heard the word that rises whenever the paint is spoken of, the word that sounds like something out of a fairy story or a tale of the stars. Radium, the most wonderful substance ever discovered, the element that shines on its own, with no fire and no flame, drawing its light from somewhere deep inside itself that no one fully understands. You are about to become one of the girls who paints with it. There will be dozens of you, then hundreds, in studios like this one across the country, in New Jersey and in Connecticut, and far out in the small towns of Illinois. You will be young, and you will be cheerful, and you will be proud of the work, and you will have no reason on this bright spring morning to be anything else. So come with me into that studio. Let me show you the long tables and the dishes of glowing powder and the rows of brushes waiting to be lifted. Let me show you the girls beside you, the friends you will make, the small jokes and the shared lunches, and the way the light follows you home in your hair. Let me show you a year that began like a gift, in a town that did not yet know what it was holding. And as the story goes on, as the seasons turn and the years move forward and the light keeps its long, patient count, let it stay gentle. What happened to these women is a hard thing, but you're not here to be frightened. You're here to remember them softly, the way you might remember someone you loved who is gone. You're here to let the telling carry you down towards sleep, so breathe out and let the green light rise, and let us begin. First, though, let me set the world more firmly around you, so that you can sink all the way into it. The streets of this town are paved with cobbles in the older parts, and with packed dirt at the edges, where the houses thin out toward the fields. The trolley runs up the main avenue on its singing rails, and the iceman comes on his slow cart, and the children play in the gutters where the rainwater runs. It is a world of work and family and church, narrow and warm, where everyone knows everyone, and a girl cannot do much that her neighbours do not soon hear of. Your own house is small, one of a row of them, sharing its walls with the houses on either side so that you can hear, faintly, the lives of the families pressed up against your own. There is a kitchen that is the heart of everything, a parlour kept for Sundays and visitors, a few bedrooms upstairs where the children sleep 2 and 3 to a bed. It is crowded, and it is yours, and you love it the way you love a thing that has always simply been there, without ever quite deciding to. Your mother keeps this house with a tired competence that you do not yet fully appreciate, because you are young, and the young rarely see how much labour goes into the world they take for granted. She rises before everyone and sleeps after everyone. She stretches the food and mends the clothes and tends the sick and somehow, out of very little, makes a home. You will understand her better later, when you are sick yourself, and feel the weight of what she carries by carrying a small piece of it. But that is later. For now she is simply your mother, always there, always doing, the fixed point around which the house turns. Your father works with his hands, as the men in this town do, in the shops and the mills and the freight yards, coming home each evening worn down to a quiet that is not unkind but is very tired. He does not say much, he was not raised to, but he provides, faithfully, and he is proud in his silent way of his clever daughter who has found such good clean work, and that pride, though he can barely speak it, you feel, and it warms you. And there is the war over all of it, the great shadow and the great engine, the thing that has made the work plentiful and the wages high. It is far away and it is everywhere. It is in the newspapers and the recruiting posters and the flags in the windows. It is in the empty chairs where the young men used to sit, gone now to the camps and the ships and the fields of France. It is in the worried prayers at Mass and the careful letters sent across the sea. You live inside it, the way everyone does now, this enormous distant thing that has reached all the way into your small town and changed the shape of every life it touched. So here you are then, fully placed now in your world, a young woman in a crowded warm house on a narrow street in a working town, in the middle of a war, in the spring of a year that has begun like a gift. You have your family and your friends and your good clean work and your bright wage and the whole long open future glowing faintly ahead of you. Settle into that. Let it be solid and real around you. And now, gently, let us climb the stair together into the studio and begin. The studio sits on the upper floor of a plain brick building, the kind of building a person could pass 100 times without ever wondering what went on inside it. From the street it gives nothing away. There is a door and a stair and a smell of machine oil drifting up from the works below, where men assemble the watches that your painted dials will someday wear like small faces. You climb the stair each morning with the other girls, your footsteps loose and easy, your voices low because the day has not yet woken you fully. At the top of the stair, the room opens out, long and high and full of windows. In the early light, those windows are pale and grey, but by mid-morning they will be flooded with sun, and the whole studio will turn warm and golden, and the green glow of the paint will fade back into the dishes until you can almost forget it is there. It is only in the dark corners, or at the close of a winter afternoon, that the light comes forward again, patient as ever, reminding you of itself. There are perhaps 100 of you, though the number shifts from week to week as new girls arrive and others marry and leave. You sit at long wooden tables shoulder to shoulder, each with your own small lamp and your own dish of paint, and your own tray of dials waiting to be filled. The tables are scarred and stained from years of use, ringed with the ghosts of spilled paste, soft at the edges where 1,000 elbows have worn the wood smooth. You came here because your cousin came here, or your sister, or the girl 2 doors down who suddenly had money for ribbons and a new winter coat. That is how the word travels in a town like this, not through advertisements in the paper, though there are those too, but through the small bright evidence of a friend who has begun to do well. You saw the coat, you asked where the money came from, and here you are. The foreman, or the woman who trains the new girls, shows you to your place on the first morning and sets a brush in your hand. It is a fine brush, a camel hair brush, slender as a single eyelash at its tip. She shows you the dish of paint, the glowing paste the colour of weak tea by daylight, and she shows you the dial, the small disc of metal with its numbers waiting to be traced in light, and she shows you the motion, the small simple motion you will make 10,000 times before this year is through. It looks easy when she does it. Her hand moves without hurry, dipping and shaping and laying the bright line down along the edge of each numeral, and the dial blooms slowly into being beneath her fingers, a little constellation of light. You watch, and you think, I can do that. And in time you can, better than most, because you are young and your eyes are sharp and your hand is steadier than you knew. The pay is by the piece. Every dial you finish earns you a few cents, and the cents gather through the day into something real, into dollars, into a wage that would have been unthinkable in the laundry or the shirtworks. A fast girl, a careful girl, can take home more than her father. You feel the strangeness of that, and the pride of it, the first time you carry your pay home and lay it on the kitchen table and watch your mother count it twice. The other girls become your world. There is the one who laughs at everything, even the things that are not funny, especially the things that are not funny. There is the quiet one who paints faster than anyone and never seems to look up. There are the sisters who finish each other's sentences, and the older girl who has been here 3 years and knows everything, and the new ones who arrive shy and leave each evening a little less so. You learn their names, you learn their troubles, you learn whose brother is overseas and whose mother is ailing and who is sweet on the delivery boy from the bakery. At noon you eat together, unwrapping your bread and cheese at the same tables where you work, brushing the crumbs away from the dials with the side of your hand. You talk about everything and nothing. You trade the small currency of a town, who is courting whom, what the priest said on Sunday, whether the war will be over by Christmas as the men keep promising. The glow of the paint sits patiently in its dishes beside your lunch, and you think nothing of it, because why would you? No one tells you to be careful. That is the thing you will remember later, when remembering becomes a kind of wound. No one ties an apron of any special kind around you. No one hands you gloves. No one stands behind you to watch that you do not breathe too near the dishes, or lick the dust from your lips, or carry the brightness home in the creases of your hands. The men who run the place are not unkind. They simply do not say, because as you will learn, there are things they would rather you did not know. But that is later. For now there is only the room and the windows and the long companionable hours of careful work. There is the satisfaction of a tray of finished dials, each one perfect, each one glowing faintly in the shadow of your hand. There is the wage in your pocket and the friends at your elbow and the sense, rare and precious for a girl in this year, that the world has finally opened a door and let you through. When the work is done for the day, you wash your hands at the basin in the corner, though the washing never quite takes all of it. A faint shine remains in the lines of your palms under the rims of your nails, and you do not mind it. Some of the girls leave it on purpose. They like to walk home in the dusk and watch their own hands glow, like something out of a story, like girls touched by moonlight. You step out onto the street and the evening is coming on soft and blue, the lamplighter making his slow rounds with his long pole and his small fire. The town settles around you, ordinary and dear, the smell of supper drifting from 100 kitchens, the trolley grinding its way up the hill, and in your hair, where a wisp has come loose from its pin, a faint green light catches the dusk, so faint that only you would ever notice it. You walk home through the gathering dark and you are happy. It is worth saying plainly because it is true, and because so much of what comes after is hard. In this spring of this year, you are happy. You are young in a town full of people you know, with money in your pocket and friends at your side and good clean work waiting for you in the morning. You have no reason to be otherwise. The houses you pass are full of families like your own, families who came from far away and made a life in these narrow streets, families who measure their fortunes in small things, a coat, a wage, a daughter doing well. Behind the lit windows you can see them at their tables, bent over their suppers, and you feel yourself a part of it, woven into the warm, ordinary fabric of the place. This is your town, these are your people, and you are one of the lucky ones. Your mother has supper waiting. Your father asks about your day in the few tired words he's left after his own. Your younger brothers want to see your hands glow, and you hold them up in the dim kitchen and let the children gasp, and your mother says something about not bringing the factory home, but she's smiling when she says it. The light is a wonder. Everyone agrees the light is a wonder. After supper you sit by the window and look out at the dark town, and the day's work is still faintly on you, a brightness in the creases of your hands that the supper and the washing did not take. You turn your palms over and watch it, the way you might watch the first stars come out. It is a small magic, a private one. It belongs to you and to the other girls and to no one else in the whole sleeping town. And the town is sleeping now, or beginning to. The lamps go out one by one along the street. The trolley makes its last run and falls silent. The dogs settle. Somewhere a baby cries and is hushed. The great brick building where you work stands dark and quiet across the town, its windows black, its long tables empty, and in the empty studio the dishes of paint glow on through the night, untended, unwatched, keeping their soft green vigil until the morning brings the girls back up the stair. Let that picture hold you for a moment. The dark town, the quiet streets, the empty room where the light keeps watch alone. There is nothing frightening in it yet. There is only a girl by a window with a day's work still shining faintly on her hands, and a town full of sleeping families and a year that has begun like a gift. Hold it gently. We will stay here a while, in the early days, while everything is still simple and bright. Tomorrow you will climb the stair again. You will take up the fine brush and the dish of light, and you will paint the small bright numbers that will tell a stranger the hour in the dark of a faraway trench. You will eat your bread among your friends and carry your wage home in your pocket and walk back through the dusk with the glow caught in your hair. It is a good life. For now, in this telling, let it simply be a good life. Let the light be only beautiful. Let the girl be only happy. And let the long count which has already begun stay silent a while longer in the dark. Let's linger, though, in the ordinary days, because the ordinary days are where a life is actually lived, and these girls deserve to have their ordinary days remembered as carefully as their suffering. The studio has its small rituals, its rhythms that mark the hours. The morning when the light is grey and the girls are still sleepy and the talk is low. The mid-morning when the sun comes through the high windows and the room warms and the chatter rises. The lull after the noon meal when the bellies are full and the work goes quiet. The long slope of the afternoon when the light begins to fail and the green glow comes forward again in the dishes. Each season brings its own version of the room. In winter the windows are grey by mid-afternoon, and the glow of the paint is at its strongest, the whole studio swimming in soft green light, while the snow falls silent outside. In summer the windows blaze and the room grows hot and close, and the girls fan themselves with finished trays and long for the cool of the evening. In spring and autumn the light is kindest, long and gold and gentle, and those are the seasons the girls remember most fondly when they remember the studio at all. There is a girl at the table beside you whom you will not forget, though you do not know that yet. She's a little older than you, with a quick laugh and a kind way of helping the new girls find their hands. She sings under her breath while she works, the popular songs, just loud enough for you to catch the tune. She's saving for a wedding. She has shown you the ribbon she bought for it, kept wrapped in tissue in her bag, taken out and admired on slow afternoons. You will think of her, later, more than almost anyone. And there is the foreman, or the manager, the man who oversees the studio, neither cruel nor kind, but simply present, the face of the company in the room. He's not a bad man as far as you can tell. He praises good work and overlooks small faults and keeps the wages coming. You do not think much about him. He is simply part of the furniture of the place, the authority you work beneath, the one who would tell you, you assume, if there were anything you needed to know. You assume that. It is the most natural assumption in the world. It is also, though you cannot know it, the assumption that will cost you everything. The work itself becomes a kind of meditation once your hands have learned it. The small repeated motions, the dip and the stroke and the pointing of the brush, occupy your hands and free your mind, and the hours pass in a pleasant haze of talk and thought, and the soft satisfaction of trays filling up with finished light. There are worse ways to spend a day. There are far worse ways. You know this, because you have known the laundry and the shirt works, and you are grateful, every day, to be here instead. So the days accumulate, ordinary and bright, into weeks and into months, and the girl you are at the start of this story slowly becomes the girl you will be at the heart of it. Expert now, valued now, woven now into the life of the studio and the friendships within it. The light follows her home in her hair each evening, the wage gathers in her pocket, the future glows faintly ahead, and the long count keeps its silence, patient as the snow, while the good ordinary days go by. The paint has a name, and the name is Undark. It is printed on the tins and spoken of in the advertisements as though it were a small miracle delivered to the modern world, which in a sense it is. Undark is the trade name, the cheerful name, the name meant for the public. But the thing inside the tin, the thing that gives the paint its glow, has an older and stranger name, and that name carries a weight the cheerful one does not. The thing inside the tin is radium. You may not know, sitting at your table with your fine brush, exactly what radium is. Few people do in this year. It is new to the world, only discovered some 20 years before, found by a Polish woman and her French husband working in a cold shed in Paris, stirring tons of dull ore down to a few precious grains of something that glowed. You have heard the woman's name. Everyone has by now. Marie Curie, the most famous woman of science in all the world. What she found in that cold shed was an element unlike any other. Radium does not sit quietly the way iron sits, or copper, or the lead in a pipe. Radium is restless. Something deep inside it is always coming apart, always breaking down, throwing off a steady invisible energy that the scientists call radioactivity. And one of the strange gifts of that energy, when radium is mixed with the right powder, is light. A cold light. A light that needs no flame and no electricity and never goes out, drawing its glow instead from the slow unmaking of the element itself. It seemed, when it was first understood, like something out of a dream, a substance that shines forever on its own. The newspapers could hardly contain themselves. Radium was the wonder of the age, the great hope, the miracle metal. It was put into everything, or claimed to be. There was radium water, sold as a tonic for the tired and the ailing. There were radium creams for the complexion, radium pills for vigour, radium bread, radium chocolate, radium toothpaste promising a brighter smile. The word itself became a kind of magic, a stamp of modern wonder, and people paid dearly to have a little of that wonder in their lives. And here you are, with dishes of it set out before you on the table, more radium than most people in the world will ever see, and you dip your brush into it 10,000 times a day. You think nothing of this, and why would you? The men who run the studio handle it as though it were ordinary. The advertisements call it harmless, even healthful. The whole world seems agreed that radium is a blessing. Who are you, a girl of 17, to think otherwise? The paint is mixed in a back room by methods you do not see. The radium itself, the true radium, the element worth more than diamonds by weight, is present only in the smallest amount, a faint dusting through a base of zinc powder and paste and glue. But the smallest amount is enough. A little radium reaches a very long way. It takes only a whisper of it to set the whole dish glowing, and only a whisper more to set, in time, a far longer and quieter process in motion, though no one tells you that. When the mixture is ready, it comes to you in its little dishes, and you see how it changes with the light. In the bright sun of midday it is dull, a pale greenish paste like something scraped from the bottom of a pond. You would not look at it twice, but draw the shades, or wait for the winter dark to come down early, and it wakes. It gathers itself and begins to shine, soft and steady and green, and the whole room fills with that low underwater light, and you remember again why they call the metal a miracle. Sometimes, when the work is slow, the girls play with it. They are young after all, and the paint is beautiful, and no one has told them not to. They paint their fingernails with it, and hold them up in the dark. They touch a brush to their teeth and grin at one another, mouths full of green stars. One girl paints a fine line along her eyebrows. Another traces the outline of a locket onto her own collarbone, so that in the dark of the picture house that evening she will glow faintly above her dress. Mysterious. Lovely. A girl lit from within. No one stops them. That is the heart of it. The thing that aches when you understand it later. No one stops them, because no one in that room believes there is anything to stop. The paint is a wonder. The wonder is theirs to enjoy. And so the girls go out into the evenings of that town glowing softly at the throat and the fingertips, and the young men marvel, and the whole thing seems like nothing but innocent delight. A small free magic given to working girls who have known little enough of magic in their lives. You should understand how reasonable it all seemed. We look back now and want to shout into the room, want to seize the brushes and fling open the windows, but that is because we know what those girls did not. From inside that spring, from inside that bright and ordinary studio, there was no warning to be heard. The science was new and only half understood even by the men who made the paint. The dangers, where they were known at all, were known only to a few, and the few were not in the habit of telling. For radium, in those early years, wore two faces, and almost no one saw the second. The first face was the miracle, the glow, the tonic, the toothpaste, the cold light that never died. That face was everywhere, on every billboard and in every paper. The second face was quieter and far harder to see. It was the slow harm the element did to living tissue, the way its restless energy, so beautiful in a dish of paint, was something altogether different when it lodged inside the soft chambers of a human body. A few people had begun to glimpse that second face. There were laboratory men who had handled radium and come away with sores that would not heal. There was talk, in the careful pages of the scientific journals, of burns and of damage, of the strange power of the element to wound what it touched. But this talk stayed in the journals among the men who read them. It did not come up the stair to the studio. It did not reach the long tables where the girls dipped their brushes. It did not, above all, reach the small simple instruction that shaped your every working hour. Because there was an instruction, and it is the instruction that mattered most of all, and we will come to it soon enough. For now it is enough to know that the paint was beautiful, and that the world believed it harmless, and that you and the other girls had every reason to believe so too. You were not foolish. You were not careless. You were trusting, in a world that had given you every reason to trust, and the trust was used against you by men who knew better and said nothing. But hold that thought lightly for now, the way you would hold a sleeping child. We are still in the early days. The harm has begun, in its slow, quiet way, with every brush you have already lifted to your lips, but it has not yet shown itself, and there is no use rushing toward the pain. Let us stay a while longer in the wonder. Let the paint be a marvel. Let the famous woman in Paris be only a hero. Let the green light be only a gift. So picture it once more, the dish of pale paste waking into light as the shades come down, the girls bent over their dials with brushes fine as eyelashes, the whole long room glowing soft and green in the winter dark. Picture the miracle as they saw it, with no shadow on it yet. There is time enough for the shadow. There is always, in these stories, more than time enough for the shadow. And let yourself grow heavier now if you are ready. Let the wonder of it settle over you like a blanket, a substance that shines on its own, a light with no flame, a room full of young women lit from within, painting the hours onto the faces of watches, sending light out into a dark and warring world one small dial at a time. It is a beautiful picture. Hold it as you drift. We will keep it beautiful as long as we honestly can. It is worth knowing a little more about the woman in Paris, because her shadow falls across this whole story, and because her own life held the same strange double truth that the girls would come to live. Marie Curie had given the world radium, had wrested it from tons of dull ore in years of brutal labour, had won the highest honours science could give, and radium in the end would take her too. The same element she had loved and studied and carried in her pockets, the same glow that had made her famous, worked its slow harm on her own body across the long years, until it killed her. She was the first of radium's victims in a sense, the discoverer undone by her discovery, and she would not be the last. But in this year, in your studio, none of that is known yet. The famous woman is only a hero, the radium only a marvel, and the marvel is everywhere. You must understand how completely the world had fallen in love with this element, how it had become a kind of magic word. Radium was modernity itself, the future made visible, the proof that science could pull wonders out of the very rock. To have radium in a product was to have a piece of the future. People paid and paid dearly for that piece. There were radium tonics, sold in pretty bottles, promising to restore vigour to the tired and the aging. There were radium cosmetics, creams and powders that claimed to give the skin a healthful glow, which in a grim joke they sometimes literally did. There were radium suppositories and radium pills and radium spa treatments, where the wealthy paid to soak in faintly radioactive water and emerge convinced they had been made young again. A man could buy a special jar that made his drinking water radioactive at home, so that he might dose himself daily with the miracle. The era believed, wholly and disastrously, that a little radium was good for you. And so the girls who painted with it had every reason in the world to believe the same. They were not credulous fools swallowing a wild claim. They were ordinary people accepting what the entire civilization around them accepted, what the doctors said, and the newspapers said, and the advertisements said, what everyone said, that radium was a blessing, a tonic, a wonder, a thing to be welcomed rather than feared. The girls' trust was not a personal failing. It was the trust of an entire age, and the entire age was wrong. The glow itself, the thing that made the paint precious, came from a marriage of two substances. The radium gave off its restless energy, invisible and constant, and that energy struck the particles of a second material mixed into the paint, a phosphor, a powder that drinks in energy and gives it back as visible light. So the dish of paste was, in a sense, a tiny perpetual engine, the radium endlessly feeding the phosphor endlessly glowing, a light that would burn on in principle for longer than a human civilization, drawing on a fuel that would not run out in any span a person could comprehend. There was a kind of terrible poetry in that, though no one saw it then. The girls were painting eternity onto the faces of watches. The light they laid down with their fine brushes would, in some literal sense, outlast them, outlast their children, outlast the very nation they lived in. A watch dial painted in that studio, were it sealed away and forgotten, would glow on faintly in the dark for centuries. The girls were mortal, brief, their lives already quietly being shortened by the very light they painted, and the light was as close to immortal as anything human hands had ever made. The studio was, in those bright years, a thing the company liked to show off, and visitors came sometimes to marvel at it. A man of business, a buyer, a curious dignitary, would be brought up the stair to see the wonder for himself, the room full of young women painting light onto the faces of watches. The shades would be drawn, and the room would bloom into its soft green glow, and the visitor would catch his breath at the beauty of it. The girls bent glowing over their work like figures in a dream. He would be told it was the future. He would believe it. And then he would go back down the stair into the ordinary daylight, carrying the wonder of it, never once thinking to ask what such a marvel might cost the girls who made it. And the girls liked being marvelled at as anyone would. It lent their work a glamour beyond the wage, made them feel themselves part of something grand and modern and important, not mere labourers but practitioners of a kind of magic. They straightened a little under the visitors' wondering eyes. They took pride in the beauty they made. There is nothing foolish in that pride, nothing they should have known better than to feel. They had been handed a genuine wonder and told it was theirs to be proud of, and they were proud of it rightly, in the only way the knowledge of their time allowed. So let the wonder stand, undimmed, for one more moment. The drawn shades, the blooming glow, the visitor catching his breath, the girl straightening under his admiring gaze. It was real, that wonder, real and beautiful and deserved, and it belonged to the girls before anything else did. The harm would come, and we have not hidden that it would come. But the wonder came first, and it was theirs, and tonight, in the telling, we will let it be the thing that lingers, soft and green and lovely, as you drift toward the edge of sleep. Hold that strangeness gently as you drift, the brief mortal girls and the all but immortal light, meeting for a few short years at a work table in a small town, in a marriage that would give the girls their glow and their glamour and their wage, and would take in exchange, slowly and without their knowing, almost everything. It is a hard exchange to look at squarely, but it is also, in its way, a kind of wonder, and the girls felt the wonder long before they felt the harm. Let them have the wonder now. Let the light be a marvel a little longer, and let yourself sink on the marvel of it towards sleep. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. There is nothing more you need to hold on to. Subscribe if you would like the next story waiting for you when you return, and then let it slip from your mind, because the only thing that matters now is rest. Sleep well. The story will keep going, soft and slow, whether your eyes are open or closed. There is a difficulty in the work, and it is this. The numbers on a watch dial are very small, and the lines you must paint are finer than a thread, and the camel hair brush, no matter how good it is, will not hold its point on its own. After a few strokes the bristles splay. They spread and soften and lose their fine tip, and a brush that has lost its point cannot lay down a clean line, and a dial painted with a splayed brush is a dial that will be sent back. So the brush must be pointed, again and again all through the day, hundreds of times, thousands. And there is a way to point it. The girls who came before you learned it, and the woman who trained you learned it, and now you learn it too, as naturally as you learn to thread a needle or sweep a floor. You bring the brush to your lips, you draw the bristles gently between them, turning the brush as you go, and your lips shape the splayed hairs back into a single fine point, wet and ready. Then you dip it in the paint, and you paint the line, and when the line is done and the point begins to spread again, you bring it back to your lips, and you begin once more. Lip, dip, paint. That is the rhythm of it. Lip, dip, paint, all day long, the brush travelling from your mouth to the dish to the dial and back again to your mouth, in a small, endless circle that you stop noticing within your first hour at the table. It becomes as unconscious as breathing. Your hands learn it and your hands keep it, and your mind drifts free to the talk of the girls beside you, to the war, to the boy from the bakery, to whatever Sunday holds, while your lips and your brush keep up their patient work without you. You should understand that no one is forcing you to do this in some cruel or careless way. It is simply how the work is done. It is the method, taught from girl to girl, sanctioned by the studio, the standard practice of the trade. When a new girl hesitates, when she draws back from putting the brush to her mouth, the older girls show her again and reassure her. This is how it is done. This is how we all do it. There is nothing to fear. And once or twice, perhaps, a girl does ask. Perhaps she has heard a whisper, or perhaps it simply strikes her as strange to be putting the glowing paint into her mouth so many times a day. Perhaps she asks the foreman, or the chemist, or whoever happens to be near, is it safe? Should we be doing this? And she is told, kindly enough, that it is perfectly safe, that the radium is good for her even, that it will put roses in her cheeks. And she goes back to her table reassured, because why would they lie? And the brush goes back to her lips. This is the thing, you see. This is the small, simple thing at the very centre of the whole sorrowful story. Not a dramatic thing, not a violent thing, just a brush and a pair of lips and a movement repeated until it becomes invisible. Lip, dip, paint. With every pass, the smallest trace of the paint stays behind in your mouth. The smallest trace of the radium, a whisper, a nothing. You swallow it without knowing again and again, hundreds of times a day, day after day, month after month, and the radium does what radium does. It goes looking for somewhere to settle. And it finds somewhere. This is the part the men in the journals understood and the girls at the tables did not. Radium, once it is inside the body, behaves a great deal like calcium. The body cannot tell the difference. It takes the radium for a building block, a useful mineral, and it carries it dutifully to the place where it sends its calcium, which is the bone, into the jaw, into the spine, into the long bones of the arms and the legs. The body, trying to be helpful, tucks the radium deep into its own framework, lays it down in the living bone, and there the radium stays. There it stays, and there it goes on doing the one thing radium always does. The restless thing, the slow unmaking, throwing off its invisible energy not into a dish of paint now but into the living tissue all around it. Quietly, patiently, from the inside. The very quality that made the paint glow, that made the metal a miracle, becomes, when it is lodged in the bone, a small steady source of harm that no washing can reach and no doctor of that time can find, working away in the dark of the body with all the patience in the world. But none of this is visible. That is what you must hold on to understand how it happened. There is no pain at first, no mark, no warning. The girl who swallows the radium feels nothing. She goes home glowing faintly and happy. She marries, perhaps, or saves for a coat, or sends money to a brother at the front. Months pass, a year, 2 years, and all the while the radium is settling into her bones and beginning its long quiet work, and she does not know, and cannot know, and the men who could have told her do not. So the days go on at the long tables, bright and ordinary, full of talk and laughter and the small satisfactions of good work. Lip, dip, paint. The trays of finished dials pile up. The wages gather in your pocket. The friendships deepen. The seasons turn outside the high windows, spring into summer, into the first cold edge of autumn, and you are well, and the girls beside you are well, and the work is good, and there is no shadow on any of it that anyone can see. You grow expert at the pointing now. Your lips know the brush so well that you could do it in your sleep. The small turn, the gentle draw, the wet fine point emerging ready. The other girls admire your speed. You're one of the fast ones, one of the good ones, and the studio values you for it. And you are proud. You should have been able to be proud. It is one of the cruelest things in the whole story that the girls who were best at the work, the fastest, the most careful, the ones who pointed their brushes most often and most exactly, were the ones the radium found first. But you do not know that yet. No one does. So you point your brush and you dip it and you paint and you're good at your work and the radium settles patiently into your bones and the year goes on. Lip, dip, paint. It is the simplest thing in the world. It is the thing that will undo you. And it is being done in this very hour at 100 tables in a dozen studios across the country by hundreds of young women exactly like you, every one of them trusting, every one of them well, every one of them counting up her bright wage at the end of the day with no idea at all. Let us not rush past them, those hundreds of girls. Let us hold them in mind for a moment, all of them at once in their studios in New Jersey and Connecticut, and out in the prairie towns of Illinois, bent over their dials in the soft green light. They are real. They had names and families and small particular dreams. They liked certain songs and disliked certain weather. They are not a lesson or a warning. They are young women at work on an autumn afternoon, and most of them are happy, and that is worth sitting with before anything else. And let us be gentle with them, and with you, as the story turns toward harder ground. We will not dwell on the suffering when we reach it. We will speak of it softly, at a distance, the way you would speak of a sorrow in another room. What matters here is not the horror of it, but the truth of it, and the people in it, and the slow, strange way a small, simple motion at a work table became the centre of one of the great quiet crimes of the age. For now the brush travels its small circle, mouth to dish to dial and back again. For now you are well. For now the light is only beautiful, settling green in the dishes as the autumn afternoon comes down. Breathe out and let the rhythm of it carry you, the oldest rhythm of work, the small repeated motion that fills a life. Lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, paint. Let it slow. Let it soften. Let it become the rhythm of your own slow breathing as you drift toward the edge of sleep. There is nothing you need to do with the sorrow of this, nothing you need to fix or feel or fear. The women are long gone now, all of them, and what is left of them is light, and what we owe them is only to remember. So remember them gently, as the brush slows and the room dims and the autumn dark comes down over the town. Remember them well, and rest. It deserves saying that there were other ways to point a brush, and this is part of what makes the whole thing ache. A brush could be shaped with a cloth, drawn through a damp rag to bring it to a point. It could be pointed against a small sponge, or by hand, or with a thin glass rod. None of these ways was as fast as the lips, and speed was money in a studio paid by the piece, and so the lips were taught and the lips were used. But the alternatives existed. The harm was not inevitable. It was, in part, a matter of a method chosen because it was quick, by people who either did not know or did not care what the quickness cost. Some of the girls, here and there, used the cloth instead, by preference or by chance. They had been shown the lips like everyone else, but for their own reasons they pointed their brushes another way, and those girls, when the sickness came through the studios, were often spared, or spared the worst. It is one of the small, cruel lotteries hidden inside the larger wrong. The girl who happened to use a rag lived. The girl beside her who used her lips did not. They did the same work side by side for the same wage, and only the smallest difference in habit decided which of them the radium would find. Think of the arithmetic of it, though the girls never could, because they did not know there was any arithmetic to do. A skilled painter might finish 250 dials in a day, or more. Each dial had several numbers, and each number took a stroke or two, and the brush had to be repointed every few strokes to hold its line. The lips met the brush, then hundreds of times in a day, thousands in a week. Hundreds of thousands across the years a girl might work. Each time, a whisper of the paint. Each whisper, a whisper of radium. The body keeping the tally that the girl could not, adding it up grain by invisible grain in the patient ledger of the bone. And the body, as we said, mistook the radium for something good. This is the part that is almost unbearable in its irony. The body has a deep wisdom, a careful machinery for taking in what it needs and building itself up. It reaches for calcium to make strong bone, and the radium, chemically, looks to the body very like calcium, and so the body welcomes it, carries it inward, lays it down lovingly in the bone exactly as it would lay down the calcium that keeps a skeleton sound. The body's own care for itself becomes the instrument of its undoing. It tucks the poison into its strongest places, meaning only to grow strong. So the radium settles into the jaw, where the body is forever building and rebuilding to hold the teeth. It settles into the spine, into the hips, into the long bones, wherever the body is most busy with the work of bone. And there it stays, and there it shines its invisible shine, not outward into a dish of paint now but inward, into the living cells packed close around it, hour after hour, year after year, with all the patience of the element it is. The glow that was so lovely in the dark of a dance hall becomes, in the dark of the body, a small relentless wounding that nothing can call back. But the girl feels none of this. That is what must be held on to understand how it could go on so long. There is no sensation to warn her. The radium settling, the radium shining, the bones slowly weakening from within, all of it happens in silence, below any feeling, in the deep places where the self does not reach. The girl is well. She feels well. She is, in every way she can perceive, perfectly fine, even as the count climbs and the harm gathers. The not feeling is the cruelest mercy and the cruelest trap, both at once, hiding the wound until it is far too deep to heal. So let the rhythm carry you once more, the small, endless circle of the work, mouth to dish to dial and back again, lip and dip and paint, while the girl talks and laughs and dreams and feels entirely well. It is the rhythm of a life being lived, and a life being quietly shortened, the same motion serving both at once. There is no need to fear it now, on the girl's behalf or your own. It is long finished, that rhythm stilled a century ago. Let it slow in your mind, gentle and even, mouth to dish to dial until it is only the slow soft rhythm of your own breath, carrying you down into sleep. Think for a moment about where the dials go, when they leave your hands. You finish them by the trayful, each one a small disc traced in light, and they pass down through the building to the men who fit them into watches and instruments, and from there they pass out into the world, and most of them in this year are bound for the war. Your work is going to the front. The numbers you have painted will be read in places you can hardly imagine, by men whose names you will never know. The war is the reason the work is so plentiful, and the reason it pays so well. An army at night needs to know the time. A soldier in a dark trench, a gunner sighting in the gloom, a pilot in an open cockpit beneath the stars, every one of them needs to read an instrument without striking a light, because a light in the dark is a thing that draws fire. And so the dials must glow on their own. They must carry their own small steady light into the worst darkness in the world. And the light is yours. You put it there, brushstroke by brushstroke, at your quiet table far from any front. there is a strange tenderness in this when you let yourself feel it. Somewhere across the ocean, in mud and cold and fear you cannot picture, a young man no older than your brother lifts his wrist in the dark and reads the hour by the soft green glow of a thing you made. He does not know your name. He will never know your name. But your steady hand has reached all that way across the world to give him this one small, certain thing, the hour, plainly readable, in the middle of the dark. The girls talk about it sometimes, at lunch, when the talk turns serious. Whose dials might be going to whose brother, whether a particular tray, finished on a particular day, might end up on the wrist of a particular boy from a particular street. It cannot be known, of course. The work is anonymous, a tray is a tray, a dial is a dial. But the wondering is sweet, and it knits the work to the war, and the war to home, and it makes the long hours feel like something more than wages. And it is more than wages. The studio is proud to say so, and the girls are proud to believe it. This is war work. This is service. While the men go to fight, the women take up the work the country needs, and dial painting is part of that great effort. A small bright part. Women's work in the truest sense, delicate and patient and indispensable. The newspapers say as much. The recruiters say as much. You are not just earning, you are helping to win. There is a dignity in that which a girl in your position has rarely been offered. The world does not generally tell girls like you that your work matters to the fate of nations. It tells you to keep quiet, to keep clean, to marry well if you can, and to be useful in small invisible ways. But the war has turned things over for a little while, and suddenly your quick hands and your sharp eyes are needed, truly needed, and you feel the strange new weight of being needed, and you carry it gladly. So you paint with care. You paint each dial as though the boy who will read it were your own. You make the numbers clean and true, the glow even, the lines crisp, because a soldier in the dark deserves no less. You take pride in the trays that pass your inspection without a single dial sent back. You're good at this, and the goodness of it matters, and for once the world agrees that it matters, and that agreement is its own kind of light. On the days when the war news is bad, the studio is quiet. The laughter dies down. The girls bend closer to their work. Someone has a brother missing, a cousin wounded, a sweetheart gone silent in his letters, and the whole room feels it, and the painting becomes a kind of prayer, each glowing dial a small act of faith sent out toward the dark in which the boys are lost. On those days the work is heavy, and the girls do it anyway, because the work is what they have to give. And on the good days, the days of victory or of a letter safely arrived, the studio fairly hums. The talk is loud and bright. The trays fill fast. There is singing sometimes, the popular songs of the hour, the war songs and the love songs, 100 girls' voices rising over the work tables while the brushes travel their small circles and the dials bloom into light. You would not trade those mornings for anything. You will remember them all your life, however long or short that life turns out to be. It is worth saying that the studio is, by the standards of the time, a good place to work. The hours are long but not brutal. The pay is real. The work is clean and skilled and respected. There are far worse fates for a girl in this year than a stool at one of these tables, and you know it, and your family knows it. And that knowledge is part of why no one questions anything. Why would you question good fortune? Why would you look for shadows in a gift? The men who run the place are pleased with you, and they show it in small ways. A word of praise, a good tray held up as an example, a trust that lets the fast girls take on the most delicate work. You bask in it a little, as anyone would. You have worked hard for this standing, and you have earned it, and the approval of the studio feels like the approval of the whole bright humming enterprise of the war and the work and the world. But here, as always, the second face waits behind the first, because the very pride that made the work go well, the care, the speed, the unflagging attention, was bought with the brush at the lips, over and over, all day long. The best girls pointed most often. The proudest girls swallowed most. The deeper your devotion to the dial, the deeper the radium settled into your bones. The war work that gave you dignity was, at the very same time and by the very same motion, doing you a harm that no one would name for years. There is no clean way to hold these two truths together, and the story does not ask you to. It asks only that you see them both. The girls were proud, and the pride was real and deserved, and the same hours that earned it were the hours that doomed them. Both things are true. They were heroes of a small homefront kind, and they were victims of a quiet crime, and they were these things in the same breath, at the same table, with the same patient motion of the brush. We tend to want our stories simpler than that. We want the victims to be only victims, acted upon, blameless and still. But these were not still women. They were workers, proud of their work, glad of their wages, devoted to a cause they believed in. They reached across an ocean to give light to frightened boys in the dark. That they were also being poisoned does not erase the reaching. It only makes the whole thing harder and truer and more worth remembering with care. So let the boy in the trench lift his wrist once more in your mind and read the hour by the green glow of your steady work, and be for that moment a little less alone in the worst dark in the world. And let the girl who painted it bend over her table in the soft light of the studio, proud and well and entirely unknowing, giving the only thing she has to give. They are bound together now, the boy and the girl, the front and the home, by a small disc of light. Let that binding be the last thought as the chapter closes. And let the room grow quiet around her, the singing fading, the afternoon light going long and gold across the work tables, the trays of finished dials glowing faintly as the day comes down. She does not hurry. The war does not hurry. The story does not hurry. There is only the work and the light and the slow turning of the hours she has spent her young strength to mark. Breathe out and let it go long and gold and quiet with her. Rest now. The dark she is painting against is far away, and you are safe, and the hour is late, and there is nothing left to do but sleep. It was not only watches, of course. As the war deepened and the work grew, the dials passed your hands in 100 forms, each bound for some corner of the great machinery of the fighting. There were the instruments of aircraft, the gauges a pilot must read in the dark of an open cockpit miles above the earth, his face stung by the cold wind, his life hanging on whether he can see his altitude and his heading at a glance. You painted those gauges. Somewhere in the freezing dark above France, a boy read his height above the ground by the soft glow of your steady hand. There were the instruments of ships, the compasses and the dials of the bridge, glowing faintly so that a sailor on the night watch could hold his course across the black water without showing a light that an enemy might see. There were the sights of guns and the faces of the instruments the gunners used to find their range in the dark. There were small luminous markers of every kind, anything that a man at war might need to find or read or follow when no light could safely be struck. All of it glowed because of the girls. All of it carried a little of their work out into the worst places in the world. The reach of it is dizzying when you let yourself feel it. From a quiet studio in a small town, the light of these girls' work spread out across an entire war, into the sky and onto the sea and down into the mud, onto the wrists and the instruments and the gun sights of countless men who would never know that a young woman in New Jersey had given them this small, certain thing. The girls were anonymous, invisible, their names known only to one another. But their work was everywhere the fighting was, a vast scattered constellation of soft green light, each point of it laid down by a brush pointed at a pair of lips. And the men who used that light were anonymous to the girls in turn. A girl could never know whose instrument she had painted, whose life her work might touch, whether the boy reading her dial in the dark was safe or frightened, or already beyond all reading. The work flowed out into the world and was swallowed by the vastness of the war, and the girls never learned its fate, never knew which of their dials had ended on a wrist that came home and which on a wrist that did not. They sent their light out blind into the dark as a kind of faith. There is something almost holy in that blind sending when you sit with it. To labour with care over a small thing that will go out from you into a darkness you cannot see into, to give your best to a stranger you will never meet, asking nothing back, not even the knowledge of whether your gift arrived. That is close to the purest kind of giving there is. The girls did it daily, without calling it anything, without thinking it remarkable. They simply painted the dials well, for the sake of the unknown men who would read them, and let the light go out from them into the dark. We tend, looking back, to fold these girls entirely into their tragedy, to see them only as the poisoned ones, the wronged ones, the victims of a cold company, and they were wronged, terribly. But they were also, in these years, givers of light in the most literal sense, working girls who reached across an ocean and a war to set a small glow into the darkness of frightened strangers' nights. That is who they were before the sickness, and it is part of who they were always, and it should not be lost beneath the harm. They gave light. It is worth saying as plainly as that. They gave light. And then, in time, the war ended. The armistice came, the guns fell silent across the sea, the boys who had survived began the long journey home. The town poured into the streets to celebrate, and the dial painters celebrated with it, glowing faintly in the jubilant crowds, proud of the part their work had played in the great effort now won. It should have been the end of the danger, the close of the chapter, the moment the studios fell quiet and the girls went on to their ordinary lives, but it was not the end, because the glowing dials, it turned out, were wanted in peacetime too. There were clocks for the home now, bedside clocks with luminous faces a person could read in the dark of the night. There were wristwatches, newly fashionable, that a man or a woman might wear and consult in a darkened theatre or on a midnight street. The wonder that the war had made urgent, the peace made merely convenient, and convenience, it turned out, was market enough. So the studios did not close. The work went on, and new girls were hired, and the brushes went on travelling from the dishes to the lips, and the danger that the war had not ended went on too, quietly, into the bright, hopeful years of the peace. There is something especially mournful in that continuation, the danger outliving the emergency that had seemed to justify it. The girls who painted in the war years could at least feel their risk, had they known it, was taken in a great cause. The girls who painted after took the same risk for bedside clocks and fashionable watches, for convenience, for profit, for nothing that could be called a cause at all. The poison did not distinguish. It settled into the bones of the peacetime painters exactly as it had settled into the bones of the war workers, patient and indifferent, asking nothing of the reason for the work. So let the constellation of their work spread out across the dark world one last time in your mind, all those points of soft green glow, on wrists and bridges and gun sights and gauges, scattered across the sky and the sea and the trenches, every one of them a small gift from an unknown girl to an unknown man, sent out in faith into the dark. And then let it fade gently, point by point as the war recedes and the years close over it, until there is only the quiet and the soft gold light of the studio going down, and the girl at her table and you, drifting now, carried by all that given light toward your own rest. In the evenings, when the work is done and the studio empties down the stair, the girls do not stop glowing. That is the part people remember, the part that became almost a legend in the town. The paint does not wash away easily. It clings to the hair and the skin and the folds of a dress, and so the dial painters carry the light home with them, out into the dusk, and the town has a name for them when they pass. The Ghost Girls. It is said half in wonder and half in tenderness. There go the Ghost Girls, glowing in the dark. You do not mind the name. None of you do. There is glamour in it, a strange free glamour that costs nothing and belongs only to you. A working girl has little enough that sets her apart, little enough that is hers alone, and here is this soft, uncanny light that makes the young men turn and the children stare. You walk home through the blue evening and you glow at the throat and the fingertips, and for a little while you're not just a girl from a narrow street. You are something out of a story. On the nights when there is a dance, the girls take pains with the glow. They paint it on purpose then, a fine line along a collarbone, a touch at the earlobes, a tracing on the buttons of a best dress, so that when the lamps are dimmed for a slow song they will shine softly in their partner's arms, mysterious and lovely, lit from within. The young men have never seen anything like it. They hardly know what to make of these glowing girls who hold the war work in their clever hands and the cold light on their skin. There is one girl who paints her teeth before a dance just at the front, just enough, so that when she smiles in the dark of the hall she flashes a row of small green stars. The boys are half frightened and wholly enchanted. She knows exactly what she is doing. She has so little, this girl, a hard life and a harder family and a future that does not promise much, but she has this one bright trick, and she plays it for all it is worth, and who could blame her? You should hold these evenings as carefully as anything in the story, because they are full of life. This is not yet a sorrow. This is young women being young, taking the one strange gift the work has given them and turning it into delight. They glow at dances and at picture shows and on long walks home under the trees, and they laugh, and they are admired, and they feel, for an hour, like the heroines of their own lives. There is nothing in the world wrong with that. There should never have been anything wrong with that. Even at home the glow follows them. A girl undresses in her dark room at night and finds the light still on her. Faint now but there, a shine at the wrists where the paint has worked into the skin, a glow in the loose hair she shakes down from its pins. Her younger sisters beg to see it. They huddle close in the dark and gasp as she holds up her glowing hands, and for the little ones it is pure magic, an enchantment, a fairy story made real in their own small bedroom by their own ordinary sister. And the mothers, who might have worried, do not worry, because they have been given no reason. The whole world says the light is a wonder. The newspapers say so, the advertisements say so, the men at the studio say so. If anything, a mother is proud. Her daughter does clean, skilled work that pays well and leaves her shining like something blessed. What is there in that to fear? So the mothers admire the glow too, and tell the neighbours, and the legend of the ghost girls grows sweeter and brighter through the town. There were friendships forged in those evenings that would have to bear in the years to come a terrible weight. The girls who glowed together at the dances would sit together later, in waiting rooms and courtrooms and at each other's sick beds. The bond that began in delight would deepen into something far heavier, a sisterhood of the harmed, holding one another up when their own bodies would no longer do it. But that is later. In these evenings the friendship is only joy, only laughter, only girls walking home arm in arm, glowing softly under the early stars. Let yourself walk with them a while, feel the cool of the evening after the warm, close studio, the relief of the workday ending, the freedom of the empty hours ahead. Hear the talk and the laughter, the plans for the dance, the gossip about who said what to whom. Smell the suppers cooking in the houses you pass, the cold smoke, the first leaves turning, and see the soft green light moving with you down the darkening street, the gentle, uncanny glow of a dozen girls walking home, the ghost girls of Orange, alive and laughing and lovely in the dusk. It is a picture worth keeping, this one, because it is the truest answer to those who would make the Radium Girls only into a lesson, only into a warning, only into a row of victims in a textbook. They were not that. They were these laughing, glowing girls in the blue evening, full of appetite and mischief and hope, taking what small joy the world offered and wringing every drop of delight from it. The harm was done to them. It was not the whole of them. The whole of them is here, in the dusk, glowing and alive. The picture house draws them on a Saturday, a great dim hall full of flickering light and the tinny piano and the faces of stars 10 feet tall. The girls sit close together in the dark, glowing faintly at the throat, and lose themselves in the story on the screen, the romance and the peril and the kiss at the end, and for a few hours they are not working girls at all but the heroines of any life they care to imagine. They come out into the night blinking and dreamy, still half in the story, and walk home glowing under the real stars which do not flicker, which keep their own far longer count. And there are the ordinary evenings too, the quiet ones, the most of them, when there is no dance and no picture show, only home and supper and the small round of family life. A girl sits with her mending by the lamp. She helps her mother with the little ones. She writes a careful letter to a brother at the front telling him the home front news, leaving out the worry, signing it with love. And on her hands, as she writes, the faint glow lingers, working its way into the very ink of the letter, so that somewhere across the ocean a soldier will open an envelope that shines just barely in the dark of his dugout. There is so much love in this story, underneath the harm. That is a thing worth saying plainly, because the harm is what gets remembered and the love is what gets lost. These were daughters and sisters and sweethearts, embedded in families that needed them and cherished them. The wages they earned fed younger children, and eased tired parents, and bought small comforts for households that had known little comfort. The work was not only poison, it was also bread on the table, and a brother's school shoes and a mother's first easy winter in years. So when you remember the ghost girls, remember the love in them and around them, the warm crowded houses they came home to, the families their bright wages helped to hold together. Remember the dances and the picture shows and the glowing letters sent across the sea. Remember that for a real and precious while before the long count came due, these girls were happy and useful and admired and loved. That is not a small thing. In the end, it may be the most important thing of all. The evening winds down now, the dance hall empties, the picture house goes dark. The girls drift home in twos and threes, their laughter fading down the side streets, their glow dimming as the paint settles and the night deepens. One by one the lit windows of the town go out. One by one the ghost girls climb the stairs to their beds, shake the light from their hair, and lie down to sleep, well and whole and entirely unafraid, with the faint green glow fading from their skin as they slip into dreams. Let it fade with them. Let the glow go soft and softer and finally still as the whole town settles into the dark. There is nothing to fear in this night. The harm is slow and silent and far from showing itself, and the girls are sleeping sweetly, and so may you. Let the picture of them dim gently in your mind, the laughing, glowing girls walking home under the stars, and let yourself follow them down into rest, easy and unhurried, the way they did on an ordinary autumn night 100 years ago. There was a freedom in those evenings that is easy to underestimate from the comfort of a later age. These were girls who, a generation before, would have had almost no life of their own outside the home. Their mothers had gone from their fathers' houses to their husbands' houses with little in between, little money, little leisure, little say. But the war and the work had cracked the old world open, just a little, just for a while, and through the crack came these evenings, these wages, these small liberties, this taste of being a person in the world rather than only a daughter waiting to be a wife. A girl could, on a Friday with her pay in her pocket, decide for herself what to do with an evening. She could go to the dance or stay home, see the picture or save the coin, walk out with this young man or refuse him. These were her choices, hers to make, and the making of them was intoxicating in a quiet way, a daily small rebellion against the narrowness her mother had known. The glow on her skin was almost a symbol of it, this strange new light that was hers and no one else's, marking her as a girl of the new world, a working girl, a girl with a wage and an evening and a self. There is one girl, let us say, who lingers in the memory of those evenings, the one who painted her teeth before the dances. She came from a hard home, harder than most, a father who drank and a mother worn to nothing and too many children in too few rooms. The studio was her escape, the wage her freedom, the glow her one bit of glamour in a life that offered little. And she spent it gloriously, that glamour, flashing her green-starred smile across the dance floor, queen for an evening of a world that had given her nothing else to be queen of. Who could begrudge her that? Who could call it foolish? It was the one bright thing she had, and she shone it for all she was worth. The picture house deserves its own remembering, for it was the great shared dream of the age, the dark cathedral where working people went to be transported. For a few cents a girl could sit in the flickering dark and watch lives larger and brighter than her own unfold 10 feet tall, the romances and the perils and the far places, the whole shining, impossible world. The girls went in groups, glowing faintly at the throat, and lost themselves utterly, and came out into the real night still half dreaming, full of borrowed glamour, and walked home under the actual stars trading the story back and forth. And then there were the quietest evenings, which were the most of them, and perhaps the dearest. The evenings of simply being home, in the warm crowded house, among the people who were yours, helping the mother, minding the little ones, sitting by the lamp with the mending or a letter or nothing at all, listening to the small sounds of the family settling toward night. These were not glamorous evenings. No one would put them in a story, but they were the soft, warm floor under everything else, the ordinary belonging that held a life together, and the girls would have grieved their loss more than any dance. It is in the accumulation of all these evenings, the bright ones and the quiet ones, that you begin to see the whole shape of these girls' lives, and to understand that those lives were full. Not full of grand events, but full in the way real lives are full, of work and rest, of friendship and family, of small freedoms newly won, and small pleasures keenly felt. They were not waiting to become tragic figures. They were living richly, in the only way and time they had, and the living was good, and it was theirs. It is worth remembering, too, that these girls were funny. We lose that sometimes in the solemnity of how their story ends, but they were young women together, and young women together are rarely solemn for long. There were jokes that ran for weeks, private and ridiculous, the kind only a group who spends every day together can build. There were nicknames, and teasing, and elaborate schemes to make one another laugh at the work tables. There was the particular hilarity that rises in a room full of girls who are supposed to be working quietly and cannot quite manage it. The studio rang with laughter as often as with song, and the laughter was as much a part of those years as anything. And the friendships that the laughter wove were the real and lasting treasure of the work, deeper even than the wage. To have a circle of friends who understood your days because they shared them, who knew your family and your troubles and your hopes, who would laugh with you and cover for you and walk you home, was a richness that many of these girls had never had before and would never have given up. It is one of the bitter graces of the story that the same work which harmed them also gave them one another, and that the friendships forged in the bright years would hold, fierce and faithful, through the dark ones still to come. So gather all those evenings into one soft remembered glow as the chapter ends. The dances and the picture shows and the long walks home, the warm lamplit rooms and the sleeping little ones and the letters written with love, the freedom of it, the fullness of it, the simple goodness of young women living their own lives at last in their own bright moment. Hold it tenderly and let it dim, the way an evening dims, into the deep blue quiet of the night, and let yourself go down with it, into the same sweet ordinary rest that held those glowing girls 100 years ago. Let us stay a while with the money because the money was the whole reason, and because the money tells you everything about the lives these girls were living. The wage at the Dial studio was, for a working girl in this year, extraordinary. 3 times what the same girl might earn elsewhere, sometimes more. It was paid by the piece, so the fast and the careful earned the most, and a truly skilled painter could bring home a sum that astonished her own family. This was not a small thing. This was a door opening that had always before been shut. Think of what a girl might have faced otherwise: the laundry with its scalding steam and its lye that ate the hands, the shirt factory with its watchful foreman and its endless seams, domestic service in another family's house, scrubbing another family's floors, eating in another family's kitchen, at the mercy of another family's moods. These were the ordinary fates, the expected fates, and against them the Dial studio shone like a promise. Clean work, skilled work, work that paid like a man's. And so the wage went home, and at home it did what wages do. It bought coal for the winter so that the little ones were not cold. It bought shoes for a brother who had been going to school in shoes with cardboard in the soles. It bought a length of good cloth for a mother who had not had a new dress in a decade. It paid down a debt that had hung over the household like weather. It eased, in 100 small, undramatic ways, the long grinding hardship that these families had carried for as long as anyone could remember. There is a particular pride in being the one who eases it. A girl who brings home a wage like that is no longer just a daughter to be fed and married off. She is a provider. She matters to the household in a way that girls were rarely permitted to matter. Her father, tired and proud and not quite sure what to make of it, treats her with a new respect. Her mother leans on her. The little ones look up to her. She has earned a place, and the place is hers, bought with her own clever hands. Some of the girls save toward their own futures. A girl puts away a little each week toward a wedding, toward a small home of her own someday, toward the dream of a life a half step better than her mother's. Another saves for her family's passage, to bring over a grandmother or a cousin still in the old country. Another simply saves, for no reason she can name, because money in a tin under the bed is a kind of safety she has never had before, a thin wall against the disasters that have always seemed to lurk just outside the door. The independence is its own reward, apart from the things it buys. A girl with her own wage can make her own small choices. She can buy a hair ribbon without asking. She can stand a friend a ticket to the picture show. She can refuse a suitor she does not care for because she's not desperate to be kept. These are tiny freedoms by the measure of a later age, but they were not tiny then. They were close to unheard of for a girl of her station, and she felt the wonder of each one. The sisterhood of the studio deepens through the shared good fortune. The girls are not rivals for the most part, though the work is paid by the piece. They are allies. They cover for one another, teach one another the tricks of the trade, share the news of which work pays best and which foreman is fair. They lend small sums in hard weeks and pay them back in good ones. They are bound together by the strange luck of having found this bright clean work in a hard world, and the bond is real and warm and lasting. On payday, the studio is at its happiest. The girls collect their wages and there is a holiday feeling, a lightness, a sense of reward earned and reward delivered. Some walk straight to the shops, some hurry home to lay the money on the kitchen table, some tuck it away with quiet satisfaction toward whatever they are saving for, and many simply enjoy, for an evening, the rare sweet feeling of having money in the pocket, and the week behind them and friends at the side glowing softly, walking home in the dusk. It is important to feel how good this was, how genuinely good before the story turns. The harm that came was not the price the girls knowingly paid for the wage. They did not weigh poison against pay and choose the poison. They were given no scale to weigh on. They were simply offered good, clean, well-paid work in a world that had offered them little, and they took it gladly, as anyone would, as you or I would have, and they built real lives on it, real and warm and hopeful lives, in the years before the count came due. And those lives were full. A girl from the studio might court and marry in these years, might set up a small home with a young man who loved her, might begin to dream of children of her own. Another might nurse an ambition the wage had made suddenly possible, a thought of something more, a half-formed hope that had never had room to grow before. The money did not only buy coal and shoes, it bought a little room for the future to grow in, and the girls filled that room with plans. Some of those plans would come true, and some would be cut cruelly short, but in these years they were all alive, all possible, all glowing faintly on the horizon like the dials themselves. The girl saving for her wedding did not know. The girl dreaming of something more did not know. The young wife setting up her small bright home did not know. They lived forward, toward their hopes, the way the living always do, and the radium settled quietly into their bones and kept its own counsel. We should let them have their hopes, in the telling, without the shadow of what we know falling too heavily across them. It is tempting, knowing the end, to read every cheerful plan as a small tragedy, every saved coin as a coin that would never be spent. But that is not how the girls lived it, and it is not how we should remember it. They lived it as hope, real and warranted hope, and hope is not made false by what comes after. The wedding planned in good faith is a real wedding, even if it does not come. The dream dreamed in earnest is a real dream. So let the wages do their good work in your mind. See the coal in the bin and the shoes on the brother's feet and the new cloth in the mother's lap. See the coins gathering in the tin under the bed, each one a small wall against disaster. See the girls on payday, light and laughing, walking home with money in their pockets and the future glowing faintly ahead of them. This was real. This was earned. This was theirs. Whatever came after, this was truly theirs. The town is settling now into another ordinary night, full of households a little warmer, a little easier, for the bright wages of its glowing girls. Behind the lit windows the families are at their suppers, and on more than one table tonight there is a small new comfort that a daughter's clever hands have bought. It is a good thing to sit with, this quiet domestic ease, the modest happy fruit of honest work. Sit with it as the lamps go out one by one, and the town slides towards sleep. And let yourself slide with it. There is nothing here that asks for worry. There is only a town of families a little better off than they were, and a tin of coins under a bed, and a girl asleep with her plans glowing softly on the horizon of her dreams. Let the count keep its silence a little longer. Let the wage be only a blessing. Let the future be only bright. And let yourself go down, easy and unhurried, into the same deep ordinary rest that held the whole sleeping town that night. To understand the wage fully, you have to understand the families it went into, and how close to the edge those families so often lived. Many had come from the old country with nothing, had crossed the ocean in the crowded dark of steerage carrying a bundle and a hope, and had landed in these narrow streets to build a life from the ground up, in a language half of them barely spoke. They worked the hardest jobs for the lowest pay. They crowded many to a room. They knew that a single misfortune, an injury, an illness, a slack season, could tip the whole household into real hunger. They lived without the cushion that softer lives take for granted. Into that precarious world a daughter's good wage came like a beam through a cracked door. It was not luxury, not for most of them. It was margin. It was the difference between scraping by and going under, between the coal lasting the winter and the children shivering, between the rent paid and the rent feared. The dial painter's wage did not make her family rich. It made her family safe, or safer, and for people who had never known safety, safer was a kind of miracle all its own. And it shifted something inside the family, this wage earned by a daughter. The old country had its old order, the father at the head, the sons valued, the daughters useful but secondary, raised to be given away. But a daughter bringing home a wage like a man's complicated that order in ways both small and large. She was consulted, she was thanked. Her opinion carried a new weight at the table. She had, without anyone quite deciding it, become a different kind of presence in her own home, and the family rearranged itself, a little, around her new standing. The dreams the wage made possible were modest, by any grand measure, and enormous by the measure of the lives that dreamed them. A girl dreamed of a wedding with a real dress, not a made-over hand-me-down. She dreamed of a small home of her own someday, with a room the children would not have to share 3 to a bed. She dreamed of bringing over the grandmother left behind in the old country, of paying the passage that would close the ocean between them at last. She dreamed of her younger brothers and sisters staying in school past the age when the family's need usually pulled children out to work. Some of these dreams were dreamed half aloud, shared among the girls at lunch, examined and embroidered and encouraged. Others were kept private, too tender to expose, carried silently to the work table each day, and quietly fed by each day's wage. A girl might say nothing of what she was saving for, only tuck the coins away week after week with a small secret smile, building towards something she could not yet bear to name aloud for fear of jinxing it. The tin under the bed held more than money. It held a future, coin by coin, growing in the dark. We know, of course, what they did not, that for too many of them the future in the tin would never be spent as they meant it to be. The wedding would not come, or would come and then be cut short. The small home would go unbought. The brought-over grandmother would arrive to nurse a dying granddaughter, instead of being nursed in her old age. We know all this, and it lends a terrible weight to every saved coin. But the girls did not feel that weight. They felt only hope, growing in the dark like the coins, and we should let them feel it in the telling, undimmed by what we know. There is a particular memory that many of the girls carried, of the first truly significant thing their own wages bought. Not the small daily things, the ribbon or the picture show ticket, but the first large thing, the thing that announced to the world and to themselves that they had truly arrived as earners. A winter coat of real quality, warm and well made, the first such coat a girl had ever owned. A piece of furniture for the family home. A doctor's care for an ailing parent that the family could not otherwise have afforded. The first big purchase was a kind of threshold, and crossing it, a girl felt herself become, in her own eyes, a person of substance. And for the girls whose families had left people behind in the old country, there was the money sent back across the sea, which carried a meaning beyond its sum. A few dollars folded into a letter, and sent to a grandmother in a village half a world away. Money earned by a granddaughter's clever hands in America. Money that said, across all that distance, we have not forgotten you. We are doing well. The leaving was not in vain. To be the one who could send that money, who could close a little of the ocean's distance with her own earnings, was a quiet glory that a girl carried in her chest like a warm coal. These were the deep satisfactions of the wage beyond mere survival, the satisfactions of provision and pride and connection, of being someone who could give rather than only receive. The girls felt them keenly, and they were right to. Whatever was being done to them in secret, this part was true and good and theirs. They were young women who had found, in their bright, clean work, the power to lift their families and honour their elders, and become, in their own and others' eyes, people who mattered. Let that truth stand alongside all the rest. So let the wage do its quiet good one last time as the chapter closes. See the families lifted just clear of the edge they had lived on so long. See the daughters newly honoured at their own tables. See the modest, enormous dreams growing coin by coin in the tins beneath the beds, the weddings and the homes and the closed oceans and the children kept in school. It was real, all of it. Real hope built on real money honestly earned. Hold it and let it warm you and carry it down with you, gently, into the deep ordinary rest of a town of families just a little safer than they were. It begins, when it begins, with something so small that no one could be blamed for missing it. A tooth that aches a little, a tooth that has always been sound, now tender against the cold, sore when a girl bites down on the crust of her bread. She thinks nothing of it. Everyone has a sore tooth now and then. She presses it gently with her tongue and waits for it to pass, the way such things pass, and she goes on with her work and her evenings and her plans. But it does not pass. The tenderness lingers and deepens, and one morning the tooth is loose, though she is young and her teeth have no business being loose. She goes to the dentist as anyone would, and the dentist looks and frowns, and does what dentists did in those days with a troublesome tooth, which is to draw it. And the girl goes home with a gap in her smile and a wad of cotton in her jaw, and supposes that will be the end of it. It is not the end of it. Because the place where the tooth was does not heal. That is the strange thing, the wrong thing, the first true sign that something is amiss. A drawn tooth should leave a socket that closes over and knits clean in a week or two. Hers does not. It stays open, sore, weeping, and the soreness spreads to the bone of the jaw around it, and no salve and no rinse and no patience makes it better. The dentist is puzzled. He has not seen its like. He treats it as best he knows, and it does not improve, and the girl begins, for the first time, to be afraid. We must go gently here, because this is where the story turns, and because the turning is hard. What is happening, though no one yet knows it, is that the radium tucked into the girl's jawbone has been at its quiet work for a year, 2 years, and the bone is beginning to fail. It is dying in small patches from within, weakened and undermined by the steady invisible energy lodged inside it. The jaw can no longer heal a simple wound, because the jaw itself is no longer whole. But that explanation does not exist yet, not for her, not for her dentist, not for anyone she can reach. So she lives inside a mystery, a frightening, shapeless mystery with no name. Her jaw aches and will not heal. She is tired, more tired than the work alone can account for. Sometimes the ache moves into other bones, a hip, a knee, a dull, deep pain that comes and goes. She is young, she should be well, she has always been well, and now she is not, and no one can tell her why, and the not knowing is its own particular torment, worse in some ways than a named disease would be. She does not at first connect it to the work. Why would she? The work is clean and skilled and praised, the wage a blessing, the studio a place of friendship and pride. The men there have told her, when she or another girl asked, that the paint is harmless, even healthful. There is nothing in her experience that would lead her to look at the soft green light in the dishes and think, that is the thing that is killing me. The thought is too strange, too large, too cruel. It does not occur to her, and it would not have occurred to you. And she's not alone, though she does not yet know it. In other houses on other streets, other girls from the studio are beginning to feel their own first small aches. A sore tooth here, a weariness there, a pain in the hip that the doctor cannot explain. Each girl thinks herself a single case, a piece of bad luck, a private trouble. None of them yet sees the pattern, because the pattern is spread across a town, hidden in a dozen separate sick rooms, and no one is standing where they could see it whole. No one, that is, except perhaps a few of the men who made the paint, and they are not looking, or they are looking away. But we are not there yet. We are still in the early sickness, the first small aches, the time of frightened not knowing, and we will stay tender with it. There is no need to rush toward the worst. The girls themselves did not rush. They hoped, as the sick always hope, that this was a passing thing, a bad patch, a trouble that would lift if they only waited and prayed, and did as the doctors said. So the girl waits and hopes and goes on. She goes back to the studio, because the wage is needed and the work is what she has. She points her brush at her lips, even now, even with her jaw aching, because no one has told her to stop and she does not know to stop. The harm compounds itself in the cruelest way, the very motion that caused the sickness continuing through the sickness, the girl swallowing more of the thing that is killing her precisely because she does not know what it is. It is almost unbearable to see from where we stand, knowing what we know. We want to reach into the picture and stay her hand, knock the brush away, throw open the windows, carry her out into the clean air. But we cannot, and she cannot, because she does not know. She knows only that her jaw aches, and will not heal, and that she is tired, and that something is wrong, and that no one can tell her what. She carries this knowledge alone, in the dark, the way the sick so often must. Let us be careful here. not to make her only her sickness. She's still herself through all of this, still the girl who laughed at the dances and saved her coins and dreamed her quiet dreams. The sickness is a thing that is happening to her. It is not who she is. She still loves her family and worries over her brother at the front and takes pleasure in small things when the pain allows. The illness has entered her life, but it has not yet taken it over, and in the spaces between the aches she goes on living as the living do. And she is held, in this early time, by the ones who love her. Her mother frets and dotes and tries every remedy the neighbours swear by. Her sisters take on her chores when the pain is bad. The girls from the studio, her glowing sisters, gather close and reassure her, even as some of them begin to feel the first stirrings of the same trouble in their own bodies. She's not alone, whatever the loneliness of the mystery. She's wrapped in love, even now, especially now, and the love is real, and it matters. We will leave her here, for tonight, in this early tender place, with the first small ache only beginning, and the worst still far off, and the love still strong around her. There will be harder chapters, and we will move through them softly when we come to them, but there's no need to carry their weight ahead of time. Tonight there is only a sawtooth that will not heal, and a frightened girl, and a mother's hand on her brow, and the long patient love of the people in her small warm house. Let that love be the thing you hold as the chapter closes, not the fear, not the mystery, not the slow wrong thing in the bone. The love, the mother trying every remedy, the sisters taking up the chores, the glowing friends gathered close. Whatever came, these women were loved, fiercely and faithfully by people who would fight for them in time with everything they had. The love came first, and the love lasted longest, and it is the love that deserves the last word tonight. So breathe out, and let the fear go soft, and let the love come forward. The girl is resting now, in her own bed, in her own warm, crowded house, with her mother near and her sisters near, and the whole tired, tender family folded in around her against the dark. The ache is there, but it's quiet for now. The hope is there too, and the hope is not yet foolish. Let her rest, and let yourself rest with her, gently, on the love, as the house goes dark and the long night comes down. The thing about this early sickness is how slowly it comes, how it disguises itself as ordinary trouble, how it gives a girl every reason to wait and hope rather than fear. A sawtooth is nothing. Everyone has had one. A spell of tiredness is nothing, not for a girl who works long hours and dances on the weekends. An ache in the hip after a long day is nothing, a strain, a chill, a thing that will pass with rest. Each symptom, taken alone, is small and explicable and easy to set aside. It is only together, only over time that they begin to mean something, and by the time they begin to mean something, the meaning is already terrible. So the girl waits and tries the remedies that her world believes in. Her mother brews the teas the old women swear by, the bitter ones, the ones brought over from the old country with the rest of the household wisdom. There are poultices for the aching jaw, and tonics for the tiredness, and prayers, many prayers, novenas said and candles lit and saints petitioned. The family throws everything it has at the shapeless trouble, all its love and all its lore, and none of it touches the radium in the bone, because nothing in the whole inheritance of human remedy was ever made for this. The seasons turn while the girl waits and hopes. The tooth is drawn in the autumn, and the socket does not heal through the winter, and by spring the ache has spread and the tiredness has deepened, and a new pain has woken in the hip or the back. A year passes this way, in small worsenings, each one explained away, each one hoped past. The girl tells herself she's getting better on the good days, when the pain eases. She makes plans again, and then the bad days return, worse than before, and the plans go quiet and the waiting resumes. There is a particular loneliness in being young and sick in a way no one understands, even surrounded by love. The body that has always been your faithful servant begins to fail you, in ways you cannot explain and no one can fix, and you feel yourself becoming strange to yourself, a person with a secret wrongness inside. The girl looks at her own hands that painted so well, that glowed so prettily, and wonders what is happening to her, and finds no answer, and tells no one the full depth of her fear, because she does not want to frighten her mother who is frightened enough. And still, through all of it, she does not blame the work. We must keep returning to this because it is the hinge of the whole tragedy. The work is good, the work is clean. The men there have said the paint is harmless. The whole world agrees that radium is a blessing. There is simply nothing in the girl's mind that connects the soft green light she paints with all day to the slow wrongness gathering in her bones. The connection is unthinkable, and so it is not thought. And so she goes on, when she can, back to the very source of her sickness, to earn the wage that the sickness now makes more necessary than ever. For the sickness costs money, that is the bitter turn of it. There are doctors to pay and remedies to buy, and the girl can no longer do the heavy work at home, which means more falls on the mother, who is already stretched to breaking. The household that the wage had lifted just clear of the edge begins to slide back toward it, pulled down by the very illness that the wage-earning work had caused. And so the girl drags herself back to the studio when she can, to earn against the cost of dying, in a circle so cruel that it could only have been built by accident, or by men who chose not to look at what they had built. Many of the girls hid their symptoms in the early days for as long as they could, and the hiding tells you something tender and terrible about who they were. A girl would feel the ache and say nothing, would work through the tiredness, would press her aching jaw with her tongue and keep her face smooth so that no one would worry. She did not want to be a burden. She did not want to frighten her mother, who carried enough. She did not want to lose the work the family needed. And so she carried the first fear alone, in silence, smiling over it, the way the strong so often carry their fears, protecting the people they love from the weight of their own trouble. There is a particular heartbreak in that protectiveness, when you see it for what it was. The girls were being poisoned by their work, and their first instinct on feeling the first signs was not to protect themselves, but to protect the people they loved from the knowledge of it. They spent their dwindling strength shielding their families from worry, hiding their pain behind ordinary faces, going on as though all were well so that the household would not be troubled. It was love, of course, the same love that ran through everything, but it meant that the girls suffered, at the start, more alone than they needed to, out of tenderness for others. And when at last the hiding could no longer hold, when the symptoms grew too plain to conceal, there was a kind of grief in the revealing, the grief of the burden finally laid on the loved ones the girl had tried so hard to spare. The mother's face crumpling, the family drawing close around the trouble at last. It was, in its way, a relief to be carried rather than to carry alone. But it cost the girl something to allow it, to become the cared for rather than the carer, and she allowed it slowly, reluctantly, only when her body left her no other choice. Let us leave her, again, wrapped in the love that is the one true comfort in all of this, the mother's tease and the sister's help and the family's prayers, useless against the radium but not useless against the loneliness, holding the girl in her fear even though they cannot hold back the sickness. That love is real, and it is doing the only thing love can do here, which is to keep the girl from facing the dark entirely alone. It is not enough. It is never enough, but it is not nothing, and tonight let it be the thing that carries you, as it carried her, gently down past the fear into the mercy of sleep. In time the girl goes from doctor to doctor, as the sick will when no one can help them. She goes because the pain has spread and the weariness has deepened and the wrongness has grown too large to wait out any longer. And the doctors examine her and frown and reach for the names of the diseases they know, and none of the names quite fit. They are not bad men, most of them. They are simply trying to map an unknown country with the only maps they have, and the maps are wrong, because the country has never been charted before. Some of them say it is rheumatism, the catch-all of the age, the name given to any ache the doctor cannot place. Some say it is a trouble of the blood, an anemia, a weakness. Some, examining the ruined jaw, reach for a comparison they do know, a disease called phossy jaw, the dreadful rotting of the bone that had once afflicted the girls who worked with phosphorus in the match factories. The comparison is closer than they know, but they cannot follow it home, because they do not know about the radium, because no one has told them, because the studio that could have told them does not. And here is one of the quiet cruelties of the story. Because no one knows the true cause, the girls are sometimes told it is something shameful. A doctor, grasping, suggests that the trouble in the bones might be a venereal disease, the sort of thing a respectable girl does not speak of, the sort of thing that ruins a reputation in a town like this, whether it is true or not. The suggestion is false, monstrously false, but it is made, and it does its harm, casting a shadow of shame over girls who have done nothing but go to their honest work each day and point their brushes as they were taught. Imagine carrying that. To be sick with a thing no one can name, in your own young body, and to have it whispered that the sickness is your own fault, your own sin, when you know in your heart you have done nothing. To have your character questioned along with your health. To watch a doctor's face change as he reaches for the ugly explanation, and to have no way to prove him wrong, because the true explanation has been hidden from the whole world by the very men who could end the mystery with a single honest word. The girls bear it mostly the way they bore everything, with a quiet endurance that is its own kind of strength. They go to the next doctor and the next. They try the remedies they are given. They keep working as long as their bodies allow, because the wage is needed more than ever now, with the doctor's bills mounting and the girl no longer able to do the heavy chores at home. The sickness costs money, and so the girl drags herself back up the stair to earn it, in a bitter circle that tightens with every turn. And still the studio says nothing. Still the soft green light glows in the dishes. Still the new girls arrive, fresh and hopeful, and are taught the brush at the lips, and are told the paint is harmless, even as their sisters at the same tables begin to sicken and fall away. The pattern is forming now, plain enough for anyone who cared to look. Girls from the same studio falling ill with the same strange wasting of the bones. But the ones who could see it whole are the ones with the most reason to look away. Because by now some of those men do know. This is the hard centre of it. The thing that turns a tragedy into a crime. The company that made the paint had, by this time, reason enough to suspect what the work was doing. There were the warnings in the scientific journals. There were the company's own chemists, who handled the raw radium with lead shields and ivory-tipped tongs and every precaution, while the girls at the tables were given nothing, not a glove, not a warning, not a single word. The men who knew enough to protect themselves did not protect the girls. That is the shape of it. That is the thing that cannot be forgiven. We will come, in time, to how that silence was finally broken, and by whom, and at what cost. But tonight it is enough to sit with the girls in the long dark of the not knowing, going from doctor to doctor, bearing the false names and the cruel whispers, dragging themselves to work to pay for an illness no one would explain. It is a heavy place to sit. We will not sit in it long, but we owe it to them not to pass over it as though it were nothing, because for them it was not nothing. It was years of their lives. And even here, in the heart of the heaviness, there is the love again, holding. The mothers who would not give up. The sisters who carried the chores and the worry both. The husbands, for some of the girls had married by now, who sat by the sick beds and held the thin hands and did not understand and would not leave. The glowing friends who came when they could, sicker themselves by the month, to sit with one another in the gathering dark. The love did not cure anything, but it was there, every day, and it was real, and it was the one true light in all that long confusion. There is a thing that happens sometimes among people who suffer the same hidden wrong. They begin, slowly, to find one another. A girl lying ill hears that another girl from the studio is ill in the same strange way. A mother mentions to a neighbour that her daughter's jaw will not heal, and the neighbour's face goes still because her own niece, who also painted dials, is suffering the very same thing. The separate sorrows begin to reach toward one another across the town. The pattern begins very quietly to become visible to the people inside it, which is the first step, though no one knows it yet, toward the day the silence will break. But that is a slow dawn, and we are still in the dark before it. For tonight, let us simply honour the endurance of these women in the time before anyone would help them. They did not know what was wrong. They were given false names and cruel hints. They went on and worked and bore it and held one another and waited for a help that was not yet coming. That endurance was a kind of heroism, the quiet, unglamorous kind that history mostly forgets, and it deserves to be remembered with care. So let us remember it with care, and then let us set the weight down, gently, the way you set down something heavy at the end of a long day. We have carried the hard part of the chapter, we have not flinched from it, and now we can let it ease, because the girls themselves had to let it ease every night in order to sleep at all. They found the small mercies, the hour without pain, the kind word, the loved face near in the lamplight, and they let those mercies carry them down into rest. We can do the same. Picture the sick room at the end of such a day, quiet now, the lamp turned low. The girl is sleeping, or near to it, the pain finally loosening its hold for a while. Her mother sits beside the bed, not moving, keeping watch the way mothers do. The house is still. The town outside is dark and silent, all its troubles folded away for the night. And in the dark the love keeps its own watch, steady and patient, far steadier than the false explanations of the doctors, far more patient than the cruelty of the men who knew. Let that watchful love hold you now, as the chapter closes and the night deepens. Whatever the day held, the night is for rest, and rest is permitted even in the hardest stretches of a life, even in the middle of a sorrow that has not yet found its end. The girl rests, the mother keeps watch, the love endures, and you, far away and safe and whole, may rest too, carried by the same gentleness that carried them, down past the weight of the day into the deep quiet country of sleep. Breathe out and let it all grow distant. The doctors and their wrong names, the whispers, the long confusion, the silence of the men who knew. None of it can reach you here. Here there is only the low lamp, and the sleeping girl, and the watchful love, and the soft dark settling over the town like a hand laid gently on a tired brow. Rest now, the hard part is told. Let the gentleness take you the rest of the way down. The doctors were not idle, and they were not, most of them, unkind. They were working at the very edge of what their age could understand, with a sickness that had never been described in any book they had studied. When a young woman came to them with a jaw that crumbled and would not heal, they reached naturally for the one thing in all their training that resembled it. And the thing it resembled was phossy jaw, the cruel affliction of the match girls of an earlier generation, whose jaws had rotted from the phosphorus they worked with. The resemblance was real, and it was a true clue, but the doctors could not follow it home, because phosphorus was not the cause, and the true cause was a thing their training had never named. So they treated what they saw as best they could, which often meant cutting away the dying bone in the hope that healthy bone would remain. But there was no healthy bone to find, not really, because the radium was everywhere in it, and so the cutting only opened new wounds that would not close, and the women were put through surgeries that helped nothing and cost them dearly. The medicine of the age, doing its sincere best, became another source of suffering, because it was working blind, in a darkness the company could have lifted with a single honest word and chose not to. And there was the cruelty of the wrong diagnoses that carried shame. We touched on it before, but it bears returning to because of how deeply it could wound. A doctor, baffled, casting about for an explanation, might land on a disease of ill repute, the kind whispered about, the kind that ruined a girl's name. To be told that, falsely, on top of everything, to have your character impugned along with your health, to see the suspicion in a doctor's eyes, or worse, in a neighbour's, was a particular agony laid over all the others. Girls who had done nothing but go to honest work were made to feel they carried a shameful secret, when the only secret was the one the company kept. But even as the confusion reigned, something was beginning to come clear, very slowly at the edges. Here a doctor, then there another, began to notice that they were seeing not one strange case but several, and that the several had something in common. The young women with the crumbling jaws had all, it turned out, done the same work. They had all painted dials. They had all worked with the glowing paint. The cases gathered together began to point, faintly but unmistakably, toward a single source, and a few sharp minds began to follow the pointing where the company did not want it followed. It was painstaking, this dawning. A pattern spread across a town hidden in separate sick rooms does not assemble itself. Someone has to gather it case by case to notice the common thread, to ask the question no one had thought to ask. And a few people did begin to ask it. A few doctors compared notes. A few began to suspect the paint, the radium, the very thing the whole world called a blessing. They could not yet prove it. But they had begun to look in the right direction. And once a true thing has been looked at, even faintly, it becomes very hard to look entirely away again. And the women themselves were beginning to find one another, which was its own kind of dawning. A girl ill in one house heard of a girl ill in another, and the families spoke, and the symptoms matched, and a cold recognition passed between them. We have the same thing. We did the same work. The separate private sorrows began to reach toward one another across the town, to recognize themselves in one another, and in that recognition was the first faint seed of everything that would come after. The gathering, the fight, the breaking of the silence. The women, isolated by the company's design, were finding the thread that connected them. There was here and there a doctor who would not let the mystery rest, and these were the ones who mattered, though they were few. Picture such a man, an ordinary physician in an ordinary practice, who has seen now his second or his third young woman with the same crumbling jaw, the same wasting, the same history of the glowing paint. He cannot make the pieces fit any disease he knows, and unlike his colleagues, he cannot make himself stop trying. He sits up late with his books and his notes. He writes letters to other doctors, asking whether they have seen the like. He gathers slowly the scattered evidence that no one had thought to gather, because he cannot bear to send another girl away with a wrong name and no help. It is to such quiet, stubborn, unglamorous men that the women owed a great deal, though their names are mostly forgotten. They had no obligation to pursue it. It would have been easier, far easier, to accept the company's reassurances, to write the cases off as bad luck, to move on to patients who could be helped. But something in them, a conscience, a curiosity, a simple refusal to look away from suffering they could not explain, kept them at it, gathering the truth piece by piece until the pieces began to form a picture that even the company's denials could not erase. And so the truth had its patient builders, on the side of medicine, working in obscurity against the tide of official opinion. They were the counterpart in their way to the women themselves, ordinary people doing a hard right thing without applause, simply because it was right and because they could not in conscience do otherwise. The story is full of such people, once you look for them, the unfamous good, the ones who would not look away, and it is largely to them, women and doctors both, that we owe the breaking of the silence that was to come. So even in this hard chapter, even in the heart of the confusion and the shame and the blind suffering, something is quietly turning toward the light. The pattern is forming. The right questions are being asked. The women are finding one another. None of it is fast and none of it is sure, and much suffering lies still ahead. But the long darkness is no longer total. There are cracks in it now, faint ones, through which a little truth has begun to leak. Hold on to those cracks as the chapter ends. They are small, but they are real, and they will widen. Rest on them, and let the gentleness carry you down. If you have drifted off already, that's exactly as it should be, and these words will simply pass over you like a breeze through an open window. If you're still here, still half awake, let this be a gentle place to let go. Subscribe if you would like more quiet stories like this one waiting for you, and then release the day entirely. There is nothing left to hold. The rest of the story will keep soft and slow whether you hear it or not. Sleep well. Let us step for a little while behind the closed door of the back rooms, where the girls at the tables were never invited. It is a quieter scene than the studio, and a colder one. Here the raw radium is handled, the precious element itself worth a fortune by the grain. And here, if you watch carefully, you will see something that the girls never saw, something that explains a great deal about all that came after. You will see the men taking care. The chemist who works with the radium does not put it to his lips. He does not handle it with bare fingers. He uses tongs, sometimes tipped with ivory, to keep the substance at a distance from his skin. He stands behind shields of lead when he can, the heavy metal that the energy of radium cannot easily pass through. He has read the journals. He knows what the laboratory men have learned, the burns, the sores, the slow harm the element does to living tissue. He knows enough to protect himself, and he protects himself carefully every day. And then he steps out, perhaps, into the studio, where 100 young women are drawing the same substance across their lips hundreds of times a day, with no shield, no tongs, no glove, no warning. He sees them do it. He has seen them do it for years. The contrast is so stark once you see it that it is hard to breathe around. The men who knew enough to fear the radium stood behind lead, while the girls who knew nothing swallowed it, and the men said nothing, and the saying nothing was a choice. We should be careful here, and fair, because the truth is bad enough without exaggeration. It is not certain that every man in the company understood in the early days exactly what the brush at the lips would do. The science was young. The specific danger of swallowed radium settling in the bone was not fully proven until later. There is a version of the early years in which some of the harm was done in genuine ignorance. A terrible ignorance, but an honest one. We can allow that much in fairness for the earliest days. But the fairness runs out and it runs out hard at the point where the girls began to sicken. Because once the girls began to fall ill, once the pattern began to form, once the company's own concerns and its own studies began to point toward the paint, the silence was no longer ignorance. It was concealment. The men who could have warned the remaining girls, who could have changed the method, who could have at least told the sick the truth so they might be properly treated, chose instead to protect the company. They denied. They delayed. They looked away. And the girls kept dying. There were studies, quietly commissioned and quietly buried. There were findings that pointed plainly at the paint, set aside, kept from the light. There were sick women told to their faces that the work could not possibly be the cause, by men who had reason to suspect otherwise. There was in at least some hearts a cold weighing of the company's interest against the lives of the girls, and a decision, made and remade, that the company would be protected and the girls would not. That is not a thing one says lightly, but the record in the end said it plainly. It is worth pausing on how ordinary the men were who made these choices. They were not monsters in any way you could see. They were businessmen, managers, chemists, men with families and homes and good standing in their towns. They went to church. They were kind to their own children, and they presided year after year over the slow poisoning of young women whose only fault was trusting them, and they kept the secret, and they slept at night. The banality of it is part of the horror. Great wrongs are so often done by perfectly ordinary men protecting perfectly ordinary interests. This is the part of the story that is hardest to hold gently, and yet we must hold it, because to leave it out would be to lie. The Radium Girls did not simply suffer a natural misfortune, a tragic accident of new science. They suffered a wrong, a deliberate and sustained wrong, in which the people who could have saved them chose, for money, not to. The light that glowed in the dishes was beautiful, but it was not the whole truth of what was done to them. The whole truth includes the closed door and the lead shields and the silence behind it. And yet, even holding this, we need not let it become only rage. Rage has its place, and the girl's story has earned a great deal of it across the years. But for tonight, for this telling meant to carry you toward rest. Let the wrong be named, and then let it be set in its proper place, which is behind the women, not in front of them. The men and their silence are part of the story. They are not the heart of it. The heart of it is the women, and the women were not defined by what was done to them. They were defined by how they met it. Because here is the thing the men behind the closed door could not have predicted, the thing their silence did not count on. The girls did not simply suffer and fade. Some of them, sick as they were, dying as they were, found within themselves a refusal to be lied to, a refusal to let the wrong go unnamed, a refusal to die quietly and let the company carry on as though nothing had happened. The silence behind the closed door was about to meet something it had not reckoned with, which was the will of the women it had tried to bury. We will come to that will and to the women who carried it in the chapters ahead, for now it is enough to have looked behind the door, to have seen the lead and the tongs and the careful men, and to have understood the true shape of the wrong. It is a cold scene, that back room, and we will not linger in it. The cold is not where the story lives. The story lives in the warm, crowded houses of the girls, in their courage and their love and their long refusal, and it is to the warmth that we now return. So let's close the door on the back rooms and step back out into the studio, and then out of the studio altogether, into the town, into the houses, into the lives. Let the cold men stay behind their cold door with their cold precautions and their colder silence. We have seen them. We know now what they were, and knowing it, we can set them aside and turn our full attention, as the story always meant us to, toward the women they wronged, who are, every one of them, more worth our attention than the men ever were. It helps sometimes to let the wrongdoers shrink. In the moment, in the years the wrong was being done, the company loomed enormous over the girls, a great institution with all the money and all the doctors and all the power. But from where we stand now, across 100 years, it is the company that has shrunk and the girls who have grown. The company is a cautionary tale, a name in a legal history, a lesson in what greed will do. The girls are remembered as people, as heroes, as the women who changed the law. Time has set things in their proper proportion. The light outlasted the dark. Let that be a comfort as the chapter ends. The men behind the door thought they had the power, and for a while they did, and they used it badly. But they did not have the last word. The last word went to the women, and to those who would not let the women be forgotten, and it goes on going to them every time the story is told again, every time someone learns their names and feels the old anger and the old tenderness rise. The silence was broken. It has stayed broken. It will not close again. So breathe out and let the cold room fade and let the warm houses come forward again in your mind, the lamplit rooms full of love and stubbornness and life. The hard knowledge is held now, named and set in its place. There is nothing more you need to do with it tonight. Let it settle, and let the warmth rise, and let yourself drift down towards sleep on the strange consoling truth that in the end, across enough time, it was the wronged who endured, and the wrongdoers who shrank. Rest now. The women are waiting in the chapters ahead, and they are stronger than you might think. Let us be precise for a moment about the difference between the two rooms, because the precision is where the wrong lives. In the back room, the men who handled raw radium did so knowing it was dangerous. They kept it behind lead. They lifted it with tongs. They handled it as little as possible and washed carefully and kept their distance. Every gesture of that careful handling was an admission, made in the body if not in words, that this substance could harm a person who came too close to it. The precautions were the knowledge enacted. The men knew, and their hands proved that they knew. And in the front room, the studio, the same substance was handled with no caution whatsoever by young women who were told it was harmless, who put it in their mouths hundreds of times a day. The contrast was not hidden in some locked vault. It was right there. 2 rooms in the same building, the careful men and the careless girls, the lead shields and the bare lips, separated by a wall and an ocean of unequal worth. Anyone who walked from one room to the other and thought about what he saw would have had to confront it. Some of them must have, and the work went on. We should sit just for a moment with the question of how. How does a person know enough to protect himself and watch others go unprotected at the same work and say nothing day after day, year after year? It is tempting to imagine such people as monsters, because monstrousness would be easier to understand. But they were not monsters. They were men with families and mortgages and reputations, men who told themselves the things people tell themselves, that it was not certain, that it was not their place, that the company knew best, that to speak up would cost them everything and change nothing. They reasoned their way in small ordinary steps into a great and terrible silence. That is the most frightening thing in the whole story, more frightening than any villain could be. The wrong was not done by demons, it was done by ordinary men, making ordinary excuses, protecting ordinary interests, each one doing only his small part, none of them perhaps feeling himself to be the author of the horror. The horror assembled itself out of 1,000 small silences and evasions and lookings away, the way such horrors usually do. And the lesson of it, the hard lesson, is that we are most of us capable of such small silences, and that great wrongs are built from them, and that the time to refuse is at the very first small one. Let us be fair where fairness is due, because fairness costs us nothing and makes the true indictment stronger. It is genuinely possible that in the earliest days, before the girls fell ill, some of the men did not fully grasp that the brush at the lips would be lethal. The specific danger of ingested radium settling in bone was not yet proven. There is a version of the first months that is a tragedy of ignorance rather than a crime of concealment. We can grant that, honestly. It does not excuse what came later. But it is true, and the truth is always the firmer ground to stand on. Because what came later admits no such excuse. Once the girls began to sicken, once the pattern formed, once the company's own concerns turned toward the paint, the ignorance ended and the concealment began. From that point on, every reassurance offered to a frightened girl, every denial issued to a probing doctor, every study quietly buried, was a choice made in knowledge, a choice to protect the company over the lives of the women. That is not ignorance. That is the thing ignorance becomes when it is offered the truth and turns away. And that is the thing that cannot be forgiven. There is a lesson in this that reaches far beyond the Dial Studios, and it is worth naming once quietly before we let the cold room go. It is that the people who do the work are so often the last to be told the truth about it, and that the telling is so often withheld for reasons that have nothing to do with their well-being and everything to do with someone else's gain. The dial painters trusted that if there were danger, they would be warned. It was a reasonable trust. It was the trust that any worker extends to those who direct the work, and it was betrayed, not by accident, but by choice, for money, which is how such trust is most often betrayed. To know this is not to live in fear, but to know where to place one's faith and where to withhold it. The girls placed their faith in the goodness of the men who ran the studio, and the men were not good, or not good enough to choose the girls over the company. The remedy the women's story points toward is not despair, but vigilance. The hard-won understanding that comfort and reassurance from those who profit are not the same as safety, and that the people who do the work have a right to the truth about it, a right the dial painters help to establish at the cost of their lives. But we have looked at it squarely now and named it truly, and that is enough. We need not carry the men's cold room with us into the night. They have had more of our attention than they deserve already. The story does not belong to them. It belongs to the women who are waiting, and who are, as the chapter said, stronger than you might think. So let the back room go dark behind us, the lead and the tongs and the careful guilty hands, and let us turn, with relief, toward the warm rooms where the real story lives. Rest now, and let the cold men fade, and let the women come forward. There is a particular suffering that comes not from the sickness itself, but from not being believed, and the Radium Girls knew it as well as anyone ever has. To be ill, truly ill, in your bones and your blood, and to be told by the people in authority that you are mistaken, or exaggerating, or imagining, or that the cause is anything at all except the one true cause they will not name. This is a suffering on top of suffering, a wound laid over a wound, and the girls bore it for years. When the first of them grew bold enough to wonder aloud whether the paint might be to blame, the company met the wonder with a wall. The work was safe, they said. It had always been safe. There was no possible connection between the bright, clean dial painting and the troubles in the girls' bones. The very suggestion was unfounded, even insulting, and the girls who had trusted these men, who had no science of their own to set against them, who were sick and frightened and poor, found it hard to push back against so confident a denial. The company went further than denial. When the questions grew more insistent, when outside doctors began to take an interest, the company arranged for examinations of its own, conducted by men of its own choosing, who returned reassuring verdicts. The girls were not sick from the radium, these examinations found. They were anemic, perhaps, or run down, or suffering from this or that ordinary complaint. Reports were issued, findings were announced, and the announcements carried the weight of authority, of science, of men in good coats with letters after their names, against which a dying girl's intuition seemed a small and easily dismissed thing. Imagine the doubt this sowed, even in the girls themselves, to feel the wrongness in your own body, to suspect the paint with a deep animal certainty, and then to be told by every authority that your certainty is false. It would make anyone doubt herself. Perhaps it is not the paint, a girl might think lying awake. Perhaps the doctors are right. Perhaps it is something in me, some weakness, some flaw. The company's denial did not only protect the company, it crept into the minds of the girls and made them doubt the truth their own bodies were telling them. And the doubt isolated them. A girl who suspects the paint but is told she is wrong, by everyone, by the company and the company's doctors, and even some of her own physicians, has nowhere to put her suspicion. She cannot prove it. She can barely speak it without being contradicted, so she carries it alone, a private heretical certainty, while the official world goes on insisting that all is well, that the work is safe, that her troubles have some other cause. The loneliness of that is hard to overstate. Meanwhile, the sickness moved through the women in its own slow course, and the courses were terrible, and we will speak of them only at a distance, because the distance is a mercy, and because the details are not what matter most. It is enough to say that the bones failed, that the jaws crumbled and the spines weakened, and the women grew frail far before their time, some of them no longer able to walk, some no longer able to lift their own arms, their bodies betraying them year by year while the company went on insisting nothing was wrong. Some of the women died in this long stretch of disbelief, before the truth was forced into the open, and they died still being told that the paint was not the cause. That is among the bitterest facts in the whole bitter story, that some of the girls went to their graves without ever being granted the simple dignity of having their suffering correctly named. They died inside the lie. The company let them die inside the lie, because the truth would have cost it money, and the girl's dignity was not in the company's weighing worth the cost. But the disbelief, total as it seemed, was not in fact total, and this is where the long dark stretch begins, very faintly to lighten. Because there were a few who did believe, a few doctors, working outside the company's influence, who looked at the pattern and the bones and the histories and concluded, against all the official denials, that the paint was the cause. A few researchers who began, quietly and carefully, to gather the evidence that would one day become undeniable. The truth had defenders, even in the years when the truth was being smothered, and the defenders did not give up. There was a doctor who studied the bones and found in them the unmistakable signature of radium, the element itself lodged where no element should be, still faintly giving off its energy years after the last brush had touched the last lip. There were tests, grim and ingenious, that could detect the radium in a living woman's body, in the very air of her breath, proving past any denial that she carried the element within her. The science the company had hidden behind began, slowly, to turn against the company, as good science eventually will. And there were the women themselves who, even disbelieved, even isolated, even dying, did not all of them surrender the truth. Some held on to their certainty like a coal kept alive through a long cold night. They knew what they knew. Their bodies had told them, plainly, in a language no company doctor could talk them out of. And a few of them began to think that knowing was not enough, that the truth, to matter, would have to be made to stand up in the light, in public, where the whole world could see it. A few of them began to think of fighting. It took an extraordinary kind of courage to think that thought, in that time, in their condition. These were not powerful people. They were sick young women from poor immigrant families, with no money and no influence and little formal education, facing a wealthy company with all the doctors and lawyers it could buy. The odds were absurd. The sensible course was to give up, to accept the official story, to spend what strength remained on simply enduring. And yet a few of them looked at those odds, and at the truth they carried in their failing bones, and decided to fight anyway. We are coming now to those few. We have walked through the long dark valley of the not knowing and the disbelieving, and it has been heavy, and we have not pretended otherwise. But the valley has an end, and the end is not despair. The end is a handful of dying women deciding that the truth was worth fighting for, and finding against all likelihood the help they needed, and forcing the silence open at last. The story is about to turn toward its strange hard light, and it is the women who turn it. So let the weight of the disbelief ease now, knowing that it did not have the final say. The company's denials were loud, and they did real harm, and some women died inside them. But the denials were lies, and lies, however well-funded, are brittle things in the end. The truth the women carried in their bones was patient, and it was defended, and it would not stay buried. The long doubt was ending, though the women in it could not yet see the end. We can see it, and seeing it, we can let the dark stretch close in peace. Picture, as the chapter ends, a woman lying awake in the small hours, sick and disbelieved and alone with her certainty. She does not know that help is coming. She does not know that her certainty will one day be proven, that her name may one day be honoured, that the law itself will change because of women like her. She knows only the truth in her own failing body, and she holds it stubborn and quiet through the long night. Hold it with her, and know as she could not that the holding was not in vain. Breathe out and let the long doubt go. It is ending in the story, and it is far behind you, in the world. The woman holds her truth through the dark, and the dark is nearly over, and the light that is coming, though it is a hard light, is real. Let that be enough to rest on. The disbelief did not win. The truth outlasted it. The women outlasted it. And tonight, carried by their stubborn quiet certainty, so may you rest, easy and whole, all the way down into sleep. There is a science to disbelief when it is organised, and the company practised it well. It was not enough simply to deny. The denial had to be dressed in the authority of expertise, had to be made to look like the conclusion of careful study rather than the wish of an interested party. And so the company arranged for the women to be examined by physicians of its own choosing, men who came with the prestige of their profession, and returned with findings that happened, conveniently, to clear the company of blame. The findings were issued with all the solemnity of science. They were in truth the opposite of science, but they wore its clothes, and the clothes were enough to fool a frightened public and a doubting girl. Imagine being the girl examined by such a doctor. You come to him sick and afraid, hoping at last for the truth, and he examines you with every appearance of care, and then he tells you, gravely, that the work is not the cause, that you suffer from something else, something ordinary, something that is no one's fault and certainly not the company's. And you want to believe him, because he is a doctor, and because the alternative is too frightening, and because you have been raised to trust such men. But somewhere underneath, your body is still telling you the truth, and the two truths war inside you, the doctor's false comfort and your own deep, certain dread, and you do not know which to trust, and the not knowing is its own slow torture. The isolation this produced was nearly total, and nearly unbearable. A woman who suspected the truth had no one in authority to confirm it. The company denied it. The company's doctors denied it. Even some of her own physicians, deferring to the company's experts, denied it. She was made to feel that her suspicion was unreasonable, even a little hysterical, the overwrought fear of a sick and frightened girl rather than the sober conclusion it actually was. To hold to the truth under that pressure required a kind of stubbornness that shaded into heroism, the heroism of believing your own body against the whole weight of official opinion. And yet, against all that organized disbelief, the truth had its defenders, and they began to gather. There were physicians outside the company's reach who looked at the cases without the company's interest colouring their sight, and who saw, plainly, what the company's doctors had been paid not to see. There were scientists who began to study the women's bodies with instruments that could not be bribed, instruments that detected the radium directly, that proved its presence beyond any denial. The truth was acquiring evidence, hard physical evidence, of a kind that no reassuring report could argue away. There is a particular kind of grim ingenuity in some of the tests that were devised, and we will speak of them only lightly, but they deserve mention because they were how the truth was finally nailed down. A living woman who carried radium in her bones gave off a faint signal, a trace of the element's restless energy that the right instrument could catch. The radium could be detected in her breath, in her body, undeniable, a physical fact that no company doctor's report could overturn. When such evidence began to accumulate, the company's wall of denial, however well built, began to crack, because you cannot deny forever a thing that an instrument can measure. So the long stretch of disbelief was real, and it did terrible harm, and some women died inside it without ever being believed. But it was not the end of the story, and it was not as total as it seemed from within. Even at its height, the truth was being defended quietly by a few honest doctors and a few uncorruptible instruments, gathering the evidence that would one day force the matter into the open. The women who held to their certainty through the dark were not as alone as they felt. Help was assembling slowly just beyond their sight, and it was coming. We should pause gently to honour the ones who did not live to be believed, because they are the most easily forgotten, and they deserve the most tenderness. Some of the women died in the long stretch of the disbelief, before the truth had been forced into the open, and they died still being told that the work was not the cause, still inside the lie the company had built around them. They did not get the vindication. They did not live to see the truth stand up in the light. They simply suffered, and were disbelieved, and died, and were buried, with the wrong name on their suffering to the very end. There is no triumph in their stories, no courtroom victory, no moment of being heard at last. There is only the quiet endurance of women who bore a terrible thing without ever being granted the dignity of having it correctly named. And yet they matter as much as any of the others, perhaps more, precisely because they got the least. They are the ones whose suffering was purest loss, redeemed by no later vindication. To remember them, to say plainly that they were wronged and that we know it now, even though they never knew we would, is a small justice we can still do them across all the years. So let us say it, here, softly, for them. We know now. We know what was done to you, and that it was not your fault, and that the work was the cause, and that you were lied to until the end. You were believed, in the end, though you did not live to see it. The truth you carried alone in the dark has come into the light at last, and it is honoured, and you are honoured with it. It came too late for you, and that is a grief beyond mending. But it came, and we remember. Let that be the thing you carry down into sleep then. Not the loneliness of the disbelieved woman, though we have honoured it, but the help assembling beyond her sight, the honest doctors and the patient instruments and the gathering evidence, all of it moving slowly and surely toward the day the truth would stand up and could not be knocked down. The woman in the dark could not see it coming. We can, and seeing it, we can let the long doubt close in peace, knowing how it ends, knowing the truth wins, knowing the women are about to be believed at last. Rest on that. Let it carry you all the way down. Among the women there was one whose name has come down to us more clearly than most, and we will give her a name here, though she stands for many. Grace. She had been one of the dial painters in the early years, one of the quick and careful ones, and she had left the work and gone on with her life, and then, like the others, she had begun to sicken. Her teeth, her jaw, her spine, which over the slow years began to fail her, until she could no longer hold herself upright without help. By the measure of the world she was finished, a poor sick woman with no power and not much time. By her own measure she was just beginning. Because Grace had decided something. She had decided that what had been done to her and to her friends would not be allowed to pass in silence. She did not have the words of a scientist or the standing of a wealthy woman, but she had a certainty that nothing could move, and she had a stubbornness that her failing body only seemed to deepen. The sicker she grew, the more determined she became, as though the wrong in her bones had hardened into a resolve that the wrong would be named and answered before she died. It was not a simple thing, she decided. To fight the company she would need a lawyer, and a lawyer would need a case, and a case would need to be a thing the law recognized. And the law in those years did not make it easy. There were rules about how long after an injury one could sue, and the radium had done its work so slowly over so many years that by the time a woman was sick enough to know it, the law might already say that her time to seek justice had run out. The very slowness of the poison, which had hidden it, now threatened to shield the ones who had caused it. So Grace's first battle was simply to find someone who would take the case at all. And this was harder than it should have been. Lawyer after lawyer turned her away. The case was too difficult, too uncertain, too costly to bring against so wealthy an opponent. The science was new and unproven in any court. The legal time limits were a thicket, and the plaintiffs were poor and dying and could pay nothing. A sensible lawyer, looking at all this, said no, and most of them did, one after another, while the months passed and Grace grew weaker, and the time the law allowed ran shorter. Think of what that searching cost her, in her condition. To drag her failing body from office to office, to explain again and again the strange, terrible thing that had happened, to lay out her ruined health before a stranger and ask for help, and to be told, again and again, no. Most people, sick as she was, would have stopped, would have gone home and made peace with the silence and spent their last strength on rest. Grace did not stop. She kept going, office after office, no after no, because she had decided, and her deciding was made of something that did not bend. And at last she found her yes, a lawyer who would take the case, who looked at the dying women and the buried science and the wealthy company and the unfair law, and decided against all prudence that the thing was worth fighting. It was not a famous firm or a powerful one. It was, in the way these things so often go, a single person willing to do a hard and unprofitable thing because it was right. The yes came late, and it came against long odds, but it came, and with it the long silence at last had a crack in it through which the truth might be forced. Grace was not alone in the fight, of course. There were others like her, other dial painters sick with the same poison, and as the case took shape they came together, a small band of dying women who would stand as plaintiffs against the company. They had glowed together at the dances years before in the bright early days. Now they would sit together in lawyers' offices and eventually in a courtroom, holding one another up, lending one another what strength they had left, bound now by a sisterhood far heavier than the one that had begun in delight. The gathering of the women was itself a kind of triumph, quiet and unremarked. Each of them had been told by the company, by the doctors, by the official world, that she was a single unfortunate case with no connection to the others. Now they found one another. They compared their histories, their symptoms, their years at the same tables, and the pattern that the company had worked so hard to deny stood revealed among them, undeniable, written in their own broken bodies. They had been isolated. Now they were a group, and a group could do what no single woman could. There is a strength that comes from being believed finally after years of doubt, and the women gave that strength to one another. To sit in a room with others who had suffered exactly as you had suffered, who knew without being told what the pain was like and where it came from, who shared your certainty about the cause, was to be released at last from the loneliest part of the ordeal. They had been alone inside the lie. Together they could stand inside the truth, and standing inside the truth, even dying, they found they could do more than they had dreamed. The lawyer began to build the case, and it was painstaking work. The science had to be assembled, the studies that the company had buried unearthed and set in order, the doctors who believed brought forward, the tests that could prove the radium in the women's bodies made ready. The histories of the women had to be documented, their years at the studio, their symptoms, the cruel course of their decline. And all of it had to be done quickly, because the women were dying, and a case cannot be won by a plaintiff who does not live to see it. That was the shadow over everything, the race against the women's own failing bodies. Every delay the company could engineer worked in the company's favour, because every month of delay was a month in which one of the dying women might die, and a dead plaintiff cannot testify. The company knew this, the company used it, and the women and their lawyer fought against it with the only thing they had, which was the will to keep living long enough to be heard, to hold on, to refuse to die before the truth had been spoken aloud in the one place where it could not be denied. Grace held on. That is the heart of this chapter, the simple, stubborn fact of it. Grace held on when holding on was agony, when her spine could no longer support her and had to be braced, when every reasonable expectation said she should already be gone. She held on because she had decided to be heard, and being heard was a thing she would not be cheated of. Not by the company, and not by the law, and not by the failing of her own brave body. She would say the truth in the light, or she would die in the trying, and either way the silence would be broken. We should let ourselves feel the size of that, the quiet enormity of it. A poor sick woman given every reason to give up, deciding instead to fight a wealthy company through an unfair law with her own dying body as the only evidence she had. It is one of the bravest things in the whole long history of ordinary people standing up to power. And it was done not by a famous figure but by a dial painter from a narrow street, and her name deserves to be remembered, and the names of those who stood with her, everyone. So as the chapter closes, hold Grace in your mind, braced and unbowed, gathering the other women around her, refusing the silence, holding on. The fight is not won yet. The courtroom is still ahead, but the silence has its crack, and the women have found one another, and the lawyer has said yes, and the truth is being assembled piece by careful piece, to be spoken at last in the light. After all the long dark, something is finally moving toward the day. Let that movement be the thing you rest on as the night deepens. Breathe out and let the struggle soften into something you can carry gently into sleep. Grace and the others are not asking for your fear or your grief tonight. They are showing you only what stubborn love can do, even in a failing body, even against long odds. They held on, they found one another, they refused, and the refusing was beautiful, and it was not in vain. Rest now, carried by their courage, which asked nothing of itself but to be heard, and which would, before the story ends, finally be heard. Sleep well. Let us understand the trap of the law more fully, because it shows how the very slowness of the poison was turned into a shield for the ones who caused it. The law set limits on how long after an injury a person could seek justice for it. This made sense for ordinary injuries, a broken arm, a fall, a wrong done on a certain day. But the radium did not work on a certain day. It worked across years, in silence, so that by the time a woman knew she was injured, the law's clock had often already run out, counting from a moment of injury she could not even have known about. The poison that hid itself for years had, in hiding, also run out the time in which the law would hear her. It was a cruelty written into the structure of justice itself, not by malice but by an old assumption that injuries announce themselves promptly, an assumption the radium quietly violated. And the company, of course, was glad to hide behind it. Why settle? Why even fight? When the law itself might simply declare that the women had waited too long, through no fault of their own, to be heard at all. The legal clock became one more thing the women had to overcome, one more wall built across their path, and it was a high one and a cold one, and many a lawyer looked at it and shook his head and said, The case could not be won. So the search for a lawyer was not merely a search for someone willing. It was a search for someone willing to fight uphill against the law's own clock, against a wealthy opponent, for clients who could pay nothing and might die before the case concluded. It is no wonder so many said no. The wonder is that anyone said yes, and the yes, when it came from a place of conscience rather than calculation, from someone who looked at the dying women and the buried truth and the unjust clock, and decided that some things are worth doing even when they cannot reasonably be expected to succeed. While the search went on, Grace was changing, the way suffering changes a person, deepening her, hardening her resolve even as it weakened her body. She had been, in the early days, an ordinary girl, no more marked for greatness than any of the others. But something in her would not bend, and the refusal to bend became, over the long ordeal, a kind of greatness after all. The unglamorous greatness of the person who simply will not give up when giving up would be so much easier. She did not choose to be a heroine. She chose only to keep going again and again, and the keeping going was the heroism. The gathering of the other women around her was a quiet miracle of its own. These were women the company had worked hard to keep isolated, each one told she was a single unfortunate case. Finding one another meant finding, at last, the proof of their own sanity. The confirmation that their suspicions were not the fevered imaginings of frightened girls, but the shared experience of a group, a pattern, a truth. To sit in a room with others who had suffered exactly as you suffered, who needed no convincing, who knew was to be released from the loneliest prison the company had built. And released, the women found they could do together what none could do alone. They brought what each of them had to the gathering. One had kept careful track of her dates and symptoms. One remembered the names of others who had fallen ill and vanished from view. One had the fierce, clear anger that kept the others' resolve from flagging. One had the gentleness that held the group together when the strain grew hard. They were not a uniform mass of victims. They were individuals, each with her own gifts and her own role, assembling themselves into something that was more than the sum of them, a force small and frail and utterly determined, pointed at the truth. The work of building the case was, for the women, a physical ordeal layered on top of the ordeal of the sickness itself. Statements had to be given, accounts of the years at the studio, of the symptoms, of the long decline, and these had to be given carefully, formally, in a way the law would recognize. For women too weak to leave their beds, this meant the law coming to them, to the sick room, where they gave their testimony propped on pillows in pain, summoning the strength to remember and recount what had been done to them. Each such session cost them dearly, drained reserves they could ill afford to spend, and they spent them, willingly, because the testimony was the thing, the truth set down in a form that could not later be denied. Imagine the courage of it, to lie dying and to gather yourself, again and again, to tell the hard story one more time precisely for the record, so that it would stand after you were gone. The women knew, many of them, that they might not live to see the case concluded. They gave their testimony anyway, building the structure of the truth out of their own failing breath, so that even if they died, their words would remain, would speak for them, would carry the fight forward when they no longer could. They were laying down evidence the way they had once laid down light, carefully, patiently, for the sake of others they would never see. And there was a strange dignity restored to them in the giving of it, even through the pain. For years they had been silenced, disbelieved, their accounts dismissed. Now their words were being written down, formally treated as evidence, as testimony, as truth that mattered. To be listened to that way, after so long, was its own kind of healing, separate from anything the case might win. The women were being taken seriously at last, their experience honoured as fact, and in that honouring they found a little of the standing the long disbelief had stripped from them. So as the chapter closes, hold the gathering in your mind, the small band of dying women drawing together at last, finding in one another the belief that the world had denied them, assembling their scattered strengths into a single stubborn purpose. The lawyer has said yes, the clock is ticking cruel and loud, the truth is being built piece by piece, and the women are together now, no longer alone, holding one another up as their bodies fail, refusing, all of them, the silence the company had counted on. It is a hard scene, and a luminous one. Rest on its luminous part. Let the women's gathered courage carry you, gently, down into sleep. The case came at last into the light. After all the searching and the building and the waiting, after all the company's delays, the women's claim was heard, and the strange, terrible thing that had been hidden for so long was spoken aloud at last, in a place where it could not be denied. It was a small enough room, by the measure of great events, an ordinary room with ordinary furniture, but what was said in it would travel far beyond its walls and would not be forgotten. The women came as they were, which is to say broken in body and whole in will. Some of them could no longer walk and had to be helped. Some could no longer sit upright for long. There is an image from those days that has lasted, of women so weakened by the radium in their bones that they could not raise their arms to take the oath, could not lift their own hands high enough to swear to tell the truth. The truth they had come to tell was written in that very inability, in the failed arms and the braced spines and the wasted frames. Their bodies were the evidence, they had only to be seen. And being seen at last was its own kind of justice, apart from anything the law would do. For years these women had been disbelieved, dismissed, told their suffering had some other cause or no cause at all. Now they sat in the light and told their stories, and the stories were heard and the world began finally to believe them. The newspapers took up the case. The public, reading of these dying young women and the company that had poisoned them, was moved and then angered, and the anger was a thing the company could not buy off or deny away. We will not linger on the legal particulars, the motions and the manoeuvres, the arguments over the unfair time limits, the company's attempts to delay yet again in the hope that the women would die before the matter was resolved. These things happened, and they were ugly, and they revealed once more the cold calculation at the heart of the company's conduct. But they are not the part worth carrying into the night. The part worth carrying is simpler and larger. The truth was spoken, the women were believed. The silence was broken in public beyond all mending. The pressure on the company grew. The science had become undeniable, the radium detectable in the women's very bodies, the pattern of their suffering too plain to explain away. The public sympathy had become a force of its own. And the women, against every expectation, had held on, had lived long enough to be heard, had refused to die quietly as the company had counted on them to do. The company found itself cornered by the truth and by the women's stubborn survival and by the watching eyes of a public that had turned against it. And so the company settled. It did not, in the way of such things, admit the full weight of what it had done. Settlements rarely carry confession, but it agreed to pay the women, to provide for their care, to acknowledge in the language of money what it had spent years denying in the language of words. It was not justice, not full justice, not anything like enough to balance what had been taken from these women, their health, their years, their futures, their lives. But it was something. It was an admission of a kind. It was the company at last made to answer. For the women, the settlement came too late to save them, and they knew it. No amount of money could put the radium back out of their bones or give them back the years they had lost or the years they would not get to have. They were dying, most of them, and the settlement did not change that. What it changed was the meaning of their dying. They would not die disbelieved. They would not die inside the lie. They would die having forced the truth into the light, having made the company answer, having been at the last believed. And that to women who had been so long denied it was worth more than the money. There is a dignity in that ending that is hard to put into words. These women had been given nothing, and had taken, by sheer will, the one thing that mattered most, which was to have the truth of their suffering acknowledged before the world. They had been meant to disappear, quietly, conveniently, one sick bed at a time, leaving the company untroubled. Instead, they had stood, or been held upright in the light, and spoken, and been heard, and changed the way the world understood what had been done to them. They had refused to disappear, and they had won that refusal. The victory rippled outward, far beyond the women themselves. Their case became known, their story spread. Other dial painters, in other towns, sick with the same poison, took heart from it and brought cases of their own. And beyond the dial painters, the case became part of something larger, a slow turning in the way the law and the public thought about the duty an employer owes to the people who do its work. The idea that a company could not knowingly poison its workers and walk away, that there were responsibilities that money could not shrug off, grew stronger because of these women, and grew into protections that would shelter workers the women would never meet. It is a strange and moving thing to suffer a wrong and in the suffering of it to win a protection for strangers yet unborn. The women did not set out to change the law. They set out, most of them, simply to be believed, to be cared for, to have the truth named. But the naming of their truth became a stone dropped in still water, and the ring spread and went on spreading, long after the women themselves were gone, into rules and rights and safeguards that exist, in part, because a handful of dying dial painters refused to go quietly. Their suffering was not redeemed by this. Nothing could redeem it. But it was not wasted either. It bought something for the future, something real, something that endures. We should be honest that the victory was partial and hard and bought at a terrible price. The women still died. The company still avoided the full reckoning it deserved. The law moved slowly and imperfectly as the law does. This was not a fairy tale with a clean, triumphant end. It was real life, where the wrongs are never fully righted and the prices are never fully repaid. But within those hard limits, the women had done something extraordinary, and it is right to call it a victory, even a partial one, even a costly one, because the alternative, the silence, would have been so much worse. And it is right, too, to let the victory be a comfort here in the night, after all the hard chapters we have come through together. The story has its darkness, and we have not hidden from it. But the story also has this moment of truth spoken aloud, of women believed at last, of silence broken beyond repair, of a wrong dragged into the light where it could no longer hide. That moment is real. It happened. The women made it happen, with their own failing bodies and their own unbreakable wills, and it can be rested on gently as the night comes down. So picture the women in the light of that day, broken and unbowed, their bodies failing and their truth ringing out. Picture them believed at last after all the years of doubt. Picture the company cornered, the silence shattered, the rings spreading outward toward a future the women would not see but had helped to make safer. It is a hard picture, and a proud one, and there is more light in it than dark when you hold it whole. Let it be the light you carry down towards sleep. Breathe out, and let the long fight rest now, finished, won as far as it could be won. The women spoke their truth and were heard. The silence broke and stayed broken. The future grew a little safer because of them. There is grief in their story, and we have honoured it. But there is also this triumph, quiet and enormous, and it is the triumph that deserves the last of the night. Rest on it. The women earned their rest, every one of them, and they would not begrudge you yours. Sleep well, carried by what their courage built. The day fades. The light in the small room goes long and gold and then grey. The women are helped home, to their beds, to the love that has held them through it all. They have done the thing they set out to do. They can rest now, as much as their bodies will allow, knowing the truth is out and cannot be put back. And you can rest too, fully, easily, all the way down, carried by the strange consoling knowledge that even the most buried truth, defended by even the frailest hands, can be forced at last into the light. Let it carry you. Let go. Sleep. Let us dwell a little on what it meant that the public took up their cause, because that turning of public feeling was a power in itself, perhaps the greatest power the women had. For a long time the women had fought in obscurity, their suffering known only to themselves and their families and the company that denied it. But when their case reached the light, when the newspapers told their story, something shifted. Ordinary people, reading of these dying young women and the company that had poisoned them and lied, were moved. And then they were angry, and their anger became a pressure that no company, however wealthy, could simply ignore. There is a reason the company had wanted the matter kept quiet. In the dark it had every advantage, its money and its lawyers and its experts against a handful of poor sick women. But in the light, before a watching public, the advantages reversed. The public did not care about the company's money. The public saw young women dying of a wrong done to them for profit, and saw a company that had known and concealed, and the public's sympathy went entirely to the women, and its contempt entirely to the company. That sympathy was a currency the women had that the company could not match, and they spent it, and it told. The settlement, when it came, was shaped by that pressure as much as by the law. The company, cornered by the evidence and the public anger and the women's stubborn refusal to die conveniently, agreed at last to pay to provide for the women's care, to acknowledge in the language of money what it had denied in words. We should not pretend the settlement was justice. It was not. It came too late to save the women, and it spared the company the full reckoning it deserved, and the sums involved could never have balanced what was taken. But it was an admission wrung from a power that had meant to admit nothing, and that wringing was itself a kind of victory. For the women, as we said, the deepest meaning of the settlement was not the money but the acknowledgement. To have spent years being told you were not sick from the work, that your suffering had some other cause, that the company bore no blame, and then to have the company pay, to have it provide, to have the world's judgment fall at last on the side of the truth you had carried alone for so long, that was worth more than any sum. The women had been called liars, in effect, for years. The settlement called them truth-tellers, and to the truth-teller long disbelieved that vindication is a kind of medicine no money can buy. And then there were the ripples, which mattered most of all and reached furthest. The case did not stay contained. It became known across the country, a story told and retold, and other dial painters in other places sick with the same poison took courage from it and came forward with cases of their own. The single broken silence became many broken silences, and beyond the dial painters, the case entered the larger current of how the law and the public thought about the duty an employer owes the people who do its work. It became one of the stones on which a new understanding was built, the understanding that a company cannot knowingly poison its workers and walk away. That understanding, once established, sheltered people the women never met and never could have imagined. Rules were made, rights were recognized. The idea took hold, slowly and against resistance, that workers had a right to know the dangers of their work, a right to be protected from hidden harms, a right to be answered when those harms befell them. None of this existed, not really, in the world the dial painters entered. Some of it exists now, in part, because of them, because a handful of dying women refused to go quietly and forced the world to look at what had been done to them. Their suffering bought a shelter for the future, and the shelter still stands. What the settlement money actually bought in the end was care and a measure of peace in the time the women had left. It paid for the doctors and the treatments, useless against the radium but able at least to ease some of the pain. It eased the financial terror that had compounded the physical suffering, the dread of the mounting bills, the fear of leaving the family ruined. It allowed some of the women to stop dragging themselves to work against the cost of their own dying, to rest at last, to spend their final strength on living rather than on earning. It could not give them back their health, or their years, but it could soften the time that remained, and that softening was not nothing. And there was a dignity in being provided for that the women had been long denied. To have the company acknowledge in the concrete language of money that it owed them something, that their suffering had a claim on it, that they were not nothing, was a restoration of a kind. They had been treated as inconvenient, disposable problems to be denied away. The settlement, whatever its limits, treated them as people owed a debt. After the long years of dismissal, to be owed, to be paid, to be provided for, carried a meaning beyond the money itself. It said, at last, you matter, your suffering matters, you are owed. But the deepest provision the women made was not for themselves at all. It was for the future, for the strangers their fight would protect, for the workers in trades not yet invented who would be sheltered, some day, by rules their suffering helped to write. That was the provision that would outlast the money and the women both. The protection bought with their lives and laid down for people they would never meet. The settlement cared for the women in their final years. Their courage cared for the future, indefinitely, and is caring for it still. So as the chapter truly closes, hold both halves of it together, the grief and the triumph, the women dying and the women winning, the settlement that came too late, and the protections that reached so far. It is not a simple ending, because real endings rarely are. But there is more light in it than dark when you hold it whole, the light of truth spoken and believed, of power made to answer, of a future made safer by the courage of the doomed. Let that light be the last thing in your mind as the day in the small room fades to grey, and the women are helped home to rest. Rest with them. They earned it. So have you. Sleep well. The story did not end in New Jersey, and we would be leaving out something that matters if we pretended it did. Far to the west, out where the prairie runs flat to the horizon, there was another town and another studio, and another company painting dials with the same glowing poison. The town was Ottawa, in Illinois, a small place of churches and porches and good plain people, and the women who painted dials there were the daughters and nieces and neighbours of the same kind of families that had filled the studios in the East. What is hardest to bear about the second town is that it came later, late enough that the company there had even less excuse. By the time the studios in Illinois were running at full strength, the truth about the New Jersey women had already begun to come out. The danger of the brush at the lips was no longer a matter of new and uncertain science. It was becoming known, and yet the work went on, in the second town by the same method, with the same reassurances, with the same silence, and a new generation of young women swallowed the same poison and began, in time, to sicken in the same terrible ways. Among them was a woman we will call Catherine, who stands, like Grace for many. She had painted dials as a young woman, and married, and made a home, and then, like the others, she had begun to fail. Her jaw, her hip, which broke under her one day as she simply went about her life, broke because the bone had been hollowed out from within by the radium she had swallowed years before, believing it harmless. She grew frail and bent and wasted, a young woman with an old woman's broken body, and she too was told at first that the work could not be the cause. But Catherine had something the earliest women had lacked. She had their example. She knew, or came to know, what had happened in the East, that other women had suffered exactly as she was suffering, that the cause had been named, that a company had been made to answer. The truth that the first women had forced into the light became a lamp for the women who came after, showing them what was wrong with them, telling them it was not their fault, telling them it could be fought. The first women had lit a way through the dark, and the second women walked it. Catherine fought as Grace had fought, and her fight too became known and moving and hard to look away from. There is an image from her struggle that has lasted, of a dying woman testifying from a chair, too weak to stand, with the broken pieces of her own body, quite literally, presented as evidence of what the radium had done. It is among the most harrowing scenes in the whole story, and we will not dwell on it, but we will not pretend it away either, because Catherine chose to make her dying public, to turn her own ruin into testimony, so that the truth could not be denied. That choice was a brave one, and it cost her, and it mattered. She did not fight alone, any more than Grace had. There were others in the second town, sick as she was, who stood with her, a small band of dying women in a small prairie town taking on a company that had poisoned them with full knowledge of what the poison did. They had even less reason to expect to win than the first women had in some ways, facing a company that had simply ignored the lessons of the first case and carried on. And yet they fought, and their fight, like the first, forced the truth further into the light and pushed the protections a little further along. There is a particular kind of courage in being the second to do a hard thing, different from the courage of the first. The first women fought in true darkness, with no example, no map, no way of knowing it could be done. The second women fought knowing what the fight would cost, having watched the first women pay it. They went forward anyway into a struggle they already knew would not save them, because they understood that their fighting might save someone else, might push the truth a little further, might make the next company think twice. That is a clear-eyed courage, a courage without illusions, and it may be the hardest kind of all. The cases in the second town, like the case in the first, did not end in perfect justice. The women died. The companies escaped the full reckoning. The law moved slowly, but the truth, once out, could not be put back, and each new case made it more undeniable, more public, more impossible to ignore. The dial painters of Ottawa added their voices to the dial painters of Orange, and together the voices became a chorus that the world could no longer pretend not to hear, a chorus of poisoned women insisting with their last breath on the truth of what had been done to them. And the truth they insisted on did its work. The science of radium poisoning forced forward by these cases grew precise and certain. The understanding of the danger spread. The practice of the brush at the lips ended finally too late for the women who had died of it, but in time for women who would otherwise have followed them. The studios changed their methods. The era of the glowing girls came, at last, to its close, and the closing was bought with the lives of the women who had glowed. It is worth pausing on that exchange, terrible and real. The dial painters did not choose to be a sacrifice. They were poisoned without their knowledge or consent, for the profit of others, and there is no version of the story in which that is anything but a wrong. And yet, out of that wrong, through the courage of the women who turned their suffering into testimony, something was won that protected those who came after. The women did not redeem their own loss. No one could. But they made of it a warning and a lever and a light, and the world was changed by it, and women they never met were kept safe by it. Catherine, like Grace, held on long enough to be heard. That holding on in both towns, in both women, is the thread that runs through the whole long story, the refusal of dying women to die quietly, the insistence on being heard, on being believed, on forcing the truth into the light before the dark took them. They had so little to fight with, these women, only their failing bodies and their unbreakable wills, and they fought anyway, and they were heard, and the hearing changed the world. There is no neater way to say it. They were heard, and it mattered, and it lasted. We are near the end now, of the story and of the night, and the worst is behind us in both. We have walked through the bright early days and the slow poisoning and the long disbelief and the hard, brave fight, and we have come out the other side into something that is not happiness, because the women died, but is not despair either, because the women won what could be won. They are remembered, their truth is established, their courage changed the law. The light they painted all those years ago has in a strange way outlasted them, glowing on in the protections they bought for the future with their lives. So let the second town join the first in your mind, the Prairie Studio and the Eastern one, the women of Ottawa and the women of Orange, all of them together now, a great gathering of glowing girls who became dying women, who became, in the end, the ones who forced the truth into the light and changed the world a little for the better. They are not a warning in a textbook. They are a company of the brave, and they belong together, and it is right to hold them all at once, with tenderness and with awe as the story draws toward its close. Breathe out and let them gather, all the women from both towns and from all the years, in the soft green light that began as a wonder and ended as their signature. They glowed at the dances, they sickened in the dark, they fought in the light, and now they rest. All of them, their long fight finished, their truth secure, their courage remembered. Let them rest, and let yourself rest among them, gently, gratefully, as the night deepens toward its deepest hour, and the story moves toward its final quiet. The prairie wind moves over the small town in the dark, the way the wind moves over all small towns, over the porches and the churches and the quiet houses where the dial painters once lived. It does not hurry. It has nowhere to be. It moves over the graves of the women, where it is said the bones still faintly carry their light, the radium patient as ever, glowing on in the dark earth long after everything else has gone still. Let the wind move over them, and over you, soft and slow and endless, carrying you down the last gentle distance into sleep. The town of Ottawa was the kind of place where the Dial Studio was a known and respected employer, woven into the life of the community, its workers the daughters and sisters of the town's own families. This made the betrayal, when it came, more intimate and more bitter. These were not anonymous workers in a distant city. They were the town's own girls, and the company that poisoned them was a fixture of the town, and when the truth came out it tore at the very fabric of the place, setting neighbour against neighbour, those who depended on the company against those who had been harmed by it. The wound was not only in the women's bones, it was in the body of the town. Catherine, who stands here for the women of Ottawa, fought from a chair, from a sick bed, from a body so ruined that her fight became a kind of public witness almost unbearable to behold. She let herself be seen, broken as she was, because she understood that her broken body was the most powerful evidence there was, that the sight of what the radium had done would say what no argument could. It was a terrible thing to ask of herself, to make a public spectacle of her own ruin. She asked it of herself anyway for the sake of the truth, and the asking was a courage of the highest kind. There is a difference, as we said, between the courage of the first and the courage of the second, and it is worth dwelling on because the second courage is so easily overlooked. The women of New Jersey fought in true darkness, not knowing whether the thing could be done at all. The women of Ottawa fought knowing exactly what it would cost, having watched the first women pay the price in full. They had no illusions. They knew the fight would not save them. They went forward anyway, into a struggle they understood would end in their own deaths, because they believed it might spare someone else. To act with full knowledge of the cost and no hope of personal reward is perhaps the purest courage there is. And there was a particular bitterness in their case that the first women had been spared, which was that their poisoning had been, in a sense, preventable by knowledge already gained. The first women had been harmed before the truth was known. The second women were harmed after, by a company that had the example of New Jersey before it, and chose to carry on regardless. Their suffering was not the tragedy of ignorance. It was the tragedy of a lesson refused, of a warning ignored for profit, and that made their fight not only a plea for justice, but an indictment of a system that would let such a thing happen twice. Yet from that double bitterness came a double strength. Because the truth was further along by the time the Ottawa women fought, the science surer, the public more aware, their case could build on what the first had established. They did not have to prove from nothing that radium could do this. The first women had proven it. The Ottawa women could stand on that proof and push further, could make the truth more undeniable still, could extend the protections a little further into the future. The first women had lit the way. The second women walked it, and in walking it, widened it, for all who would come after. It is right to hold the two towns together finally as one story, because that is what they are. Orange in the east and Ottawa in the west. The watch dials and the clock dials, the first wave and the second, all of it one long act of poisoning and one long act of resistance carried out by hundreds of women across years and miles, bound by the same glowing paint and the same stubborn refusal to be silenced. They never all met. Most of them never knew most of the others, but they were one company in the end, one sisterhood of the harmed and the brave, and history remembers them rightly as one. So let them gather, as the chapter closes, all the women of both towns across all the years into one soft glowing company in the dark. The girls who painted watches and the girls who painted clocks, the first who fought blind and the second who fought knowing. Grace and Catherine and all the hundreds whose names we have lost together now, their long fight finished, their truth secured, their courage joined. Let the prairie wind move over all of them at once, soft and slow and endless, and over you as well, carrying you down among them into the deep glowing quiet where the story comes to rest. Sleep now. They are with you. Sleep. There is a strange and quiet fact that lingers at the end of this story, and it is this. The radium that the women swallowed does not go away. It is one of the patient elements, one of the slow ones. The energy it gives off fades only across spans of time so vast that they make a human life look like a single breath. And so the radium that lodged in the women's bones is, in a sense, still there, still in the earth where they were laid to rest, still faintly giving off its light, as it will go on doing for longer than any of us can truly imagine. Scientists years later could measure it. They could pass their instruments over the resting places of the dial painters and detect the faint signal of the radium still within, still glowing in the dark of the ground, undimmed by all the decades. It is an eerie thought, and a strangely tender one. The women carried a light in life, in their hair and on their hands, the soft green glow that made the town call them ghost girls. And they carry it still, in death, the same light, patient and undying, keeping its long count in the quiet earth. We can choose what to make of that. We could make of it only horror, the poison enduring, the wrong written permanently into the bones, and that reading is not false, but there is another way to hold it, gentler and truer to the whole of who these women were. The light that endures is also, in a way, their signature, the mark of what they did and who they were, persisting when the company that poisoned them has crumbled into a footnote. The women's light outlasts the men's silence. The women's light outlasts everything. There is a kind of justice in that, slow and strange, but real. And there is a more ordinary endurance too, one that does not glow but lasts just as long. The protections the women won, the rules that say a company cannot knowingly poison the people who do its work, that there are duties an employer owes that money cannot dissolve, that a worker harmed by hidden dangers has a right to be heard and answered. These rules did not exist, not really, before the dial painters forced them into being. They exist now, in part, because of these women, and every worker sheltered by them is sheltered in some small measure by the dial painters who never knew their names. Think of how far that shelter reaches. The women who fought were a few dozen, in 2 small towns, almost 100 years ago. But the protections their fight helped establish have reached across a century and across a continent, and into workplaces beyond counting, sheltering people in trades the dial painters could never have imagined, against dangers they never heard of. The rings spread and went on spreading and are spreading still. The good the women did was not contained by their own short-ruined lives. It outran them and outlives them and goes on doing its quiet work in the world right now, tonight, while you rest. It is worth saying plainly as the story closes that this is the truest answer to the wrong that was done. The company tried to make the women disappear, to bury their suffering in silence, to let them die quietly and unremembered so that the profits could go on. And the exact opposite happened. The women are remembered, and the company is remembered only for what it did to them. The women's names are honoured, and the men's names are spoken, where they are spoken at all, with contempt. The silence that was meant to erase the women instead preserved them, because they broke it, and in breaking it they made themselves unforgettable. We remember them now not as victims only, though they were wronged, and not as a warning only, though their story warns. We remember them as people, first and last, as the laughing girls who glowed at the dances, full of appetite and hope, as the proud workers who reached across an ocean to give light to frightened soldiers, as the daughters and sisters and wives whose bright wages warmed their families' homes, and as the dying women who, given every reason to surrender, chose instead to fight and to be heard, and to leave the world a little safer than they found it. All of that, together, is who they were. The town of Orange is still there, and the town of Ottawa going on with their ordinary lives, and in each of them now, there are memorials to the dial painters, quiet markers that say, here is who they were, here is what was done to them, here is what they did in return. People stop at these markers sometimes and read the names and feel the old story move through them, the tenderness and the anger and the awe. The women are not forgotten, they are kept. The keeping is a small thing against all they lost, but it is not nothing, and it is the thing we can still give them, which is to remember and to tell the story again, gently, the way we have tonight. And so the long count that began in a bright studio 100 years ago comes, in the telling, to its rest. The radium goes on glowing, patient and undying, in the quiet earth. The protections go on sheltering, ring upon spreading ring, in workplaces the world over. The women go on being remembered, named and honoured, in the 2 small towns and in every place their story is told. The light they carried did not go out. It only changed its keeping, from their hair and their hands to the earth and the law and the long memory of the world. It is still here. It will be here long after all of us are gone. There is nothing left now in the story that asks for fear. We have come all the way through it. The wonder and the wrong, the poison and the courage, the dark and the breaking of the dark. We have not hidden from the hard parts, and we have not let them be the whole. And now, at the end, what remains is mostly light, the strange enduring light of the women themselves, glowing on in the earth and the law and the memory, undimmed, patient, lasting longer than the wrong that was done to them, lasting, perhaps, nearly forever. Let that light be the thing you hold now, as the story gives way to silence, and the night gives way to its deepest hour. Not the company, not the silence, not the suffering, but the light. The soft green glow of the ghost girls walking home under the stars in the bright early days, the fierce inner light of the women who would not be silenced, the spreading light of the good they did for strangers they would never meet. It is all one light in the end, and it is theirs, and they have given a little of it to you tonight simply by being remembered. So carry it gently down with you towards sleep. There is no more story to tell. There is only the light and the quiet and the long rest that the women earned and would gladly share with you. They glowed, and they suffered, and they fought, and they won what could be won, and now they rest, all of them, their count complete, their light secure, and you may rest too, fully, easily, carried by their story to the soft edge of sleep, where the telling ends and the silence begins. The studio is long gone now. The long tables, the dishes of glowing paste, the rows of fine brushes, all of it gone, swept away by the years. But if you close your eyes, you can still see it. The high room full of windows, the soft green light rising in the dishes as the afternoon comes down, the young women bent over their work, glowing faintly, alive. Hold that picture as it dims. Let it grow soft and softer, the light going down like a lamp turned low, the room going quiet, the women going still until there is only the green glow, patient and undying, fading gently into the dark. And then let even the glow go soft and let the dark come down, warm and complete like a blanket drawn up over the whole long story. The women are at rest, the truth is told, the light endures, there is nothing more to do, and nowhere more to be, and no more weight to carry. Only the dark and the quiet and the deep, slow breathing of sleep coming for you now, gentle and sure, the way the night comes for the whole tired world. Let it come. Let it carry you. The story is finished, and it was, in the end, a story about light and about women who would not be put out. Rest now among them, in the soft green dark, and let the long count keep its patient watch over your sleep, as it kept watch over theirs, on through the night, on through all the nights, on past the edge of anything that can be counted at all. There is one more thing worth holding, as the last of the story settles, and it is the strange long arithmetic of the radium itself, because it puts a human life into a humbling proportion. The element the women carried fades so slowly that to halve its strength takes some 16 centuries, 1600 years for it to become half of what it was. The women lived, most of them, only a handful of years after the poison entered them. Set those two spans side by side, the brief human life and the vast mineral patience, and you feel something like vertigo, the smallness of a person against the enormousness of what was put inside her. And yet, set against that same vastness, the women's victory looks not smaller but larger, because they wrung it from such a short and suffering span. They did not have centuries. They had a few hard years in failing bodies against a powerful foe, and in those few years they forced a truth into the light that will outlast not only their lives, but very likely the institutions that wronged them, perhaps even the nations those institutions belonged to. They were brief, and they were frail, and they reached across time in a way the patient radium itself might almost envy. The women's deed will be remembered long after the last dial they painted has finally gone dark. The memory is kept now in deliberate ways, which the women themselves never saw and could hardly have imagined. In Ottawa there stands a statue, a young woman with a brush in one hand and a flower in the other, raised by a town that came, in time, to understand what its daughters had suffered and to honour them for it. In Orange and beyond there are markers and rememberings of other kinds. The names that the company tried to bury in silence are now set in bronze and stone, spoken aloud at gatherings, taught to children, carried forward deliberately into a future the women bought but could not enter. People stop at these markers sometimes, and stand a while, and feel the old story move through them. They read the names. They picture the glowing girls and the long suffering and the hard, brave fight. They feel the anger rise, and the tenderness, and the awe, the particular awe one feels before ordinary people who did something extraordinary. And then they go back to their own lives, carrying a little of the story with them, and in that carrying the women live on, not as victims frozen in a textbook, but as presences, companions, examples of what the frail and the doomed can still accomplish when they refuse to be silent. That is the truest memorial, finer than any bronze, the carrying of the story in living minds. Every time it is told again, gently, with care, the women are a little more remembered, a little more honoured, a little more present in the world they left. They wanted, most of them, only to be believed. And they have been believed, and more than believed, they have been honoured, generation after generation, by people who never met them and never could have, but who know their names and feel their courage and pass it on. The silence the company built has become its opposite, an ever-widening telling, and the telling is the women's true and lasting victory. So we have told it again tonight, you and I, gently, all the way through, the wonder and the wrong and the long, brave breaking of the dark. And now we have come to the end of the telling, where there is nothing left to say, only the women at rest and the light enduring and the quiet coming down. We have honoured the hard parts, and we have not let them be the whole. We have remembered the women as people, first and last, the laughing girls and the dying women, and the ones who changed the law. We have kept faith with them, in the small way a telling can, and now we can let them rest, and rest ourselves. Let the light be the very last thing then, as it was the very first. The soft green glow that rose from the dishes in the cold studio before dawn. The glow that followed the girls home in their hair. The glow that endures, patient and undying, in the earth, and the lore and the long memory of the world. It was beautiful before it was terrible, and it is beautiful again now, at the end, transformed, the women's own light, outlasting everything that was done to them. Hold it as it fades. Let it go soft and softer, down to the faintest breath of green at the edge of the dark, and then let even that go, and let the dark come down complete, and sleep. The room is dark now, and yet it is not. There is still a faint green light, the way there was at the very beginning, soft and low and patient, the colour of new leaves seen under water. It rises gently from somewhere just past the edge of sight, and it does not flicker, and it does not warm the air, and it asks nothing of you at all. It simply waits, the way a kind thing waits, while you let yourself go down towards sleep. Let your breathing slow. Let it grow long and even, in and out, like the slow turning of a quiet day. There is nowhere you need to be. There's nothing you need to hold. The story is finished, and the women are at rest, and the light goes on glowing softly in the dark, keeping its patient watch, asking nothing, only shining, the way it always has, the way it always will. Let the day you have carried slip from your shoulders now, piece by piece, the way the light slips from a girl's hands as the paint settles and the night comes down. Let it go. There is no weight you need to keep tonight. The women laid down far heavier weights than yours at the end and found their rest, and they would want you to find yours, easily, gently, without any struggle at all. Picture the high room one last time, the studio full of windows, the soft green glow rising in the dishes as the afternoon goes long and gold and then blue and then dark. Picture the young women bent over their work, glowing faintly, alive and well and unafraid, in the bright early days before the long count came due. Hold them there, in the light, where they were happy. Let that be where they live in you. And let the picture dim, slowly, kindly, the light going down like a lamp turned low. Softer now. Let the green light fade to the faintest glow, just a breath of it at the edge of the dark, just enough to know it is there. Let the room grow quiet. Let the women grow still. Let everything that moved through the story settle and slow and come to rest, the way the whole sleeping town settled 100 years ago under the patient stars. There is only the dark now, warm and soft and complete, drawn up over everything like a blanket. There is only your slow breathing, in and out, carrying you down the last gentle distance. There is only the rest you have earned, and the light keeping watch, far off and faint and undying, while you let go and let go and let go. Sleep now, the story will keep, the light will keep. The women are remembered, and they are at rest, and so may you be, all the way down, all the way under, into the deep soft dark where there is nothing left to carry and nothing left to do but sleep. And if this was a comfort to you tonight, subscribe softly before you go so that the next quiet story will be waiting for you when you return. There is no hurry, it will keep. Sleep well. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments.